everyone. Good morning. Welcome to this morning's event. We would want to inform everyone that we will officially begin at 9:05. Thank you.
Is presenting a certificate of appreciation for all participants.
Siyempre sinimulan ko na eh. Hi, Sir Paul!
Okay. Hello, good morning, everyone. Okay, so we will now officially begin our program. MedEureka, one of the main events of UP every year, is composed of lecture sessions by invited experts from various fields of biomedical and clinical research. This event aims to bring science to people through seminars and discussion forums. This year, in the midst of the health crisis that the world is facing, MedEureka goes online with MedEureka Coursing the Pandemic. Truly, science never stops, am I right? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Renzo from the University of the Philippines Physician Scientist Association, and I will be your host and moderator for this morning. In today's event, we will be tackling pertinent topics on four subjects. For the clinical management, we regret to inform you that Dr. Raul Destura will not be able to join us today. But rest assured, we will have jam-packed, high-yield discussions in public health, basic and clinical research, and local response in the context of COVID-19. Now, to start our event, let's welcome Miss Leslie Faye Cando, President of the UPPSA, for her opening remarks.
Hello. Hello. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Um, so the past year has probably been some of the hardest. As of today, more than 145 million people have been infected with this virus, which has claimed more than 3 million lives. On top of this, millions of people with other diseases have also been neglected. Millions have lost their jobs. Millions had to stop schooling, and millions have lost their source of income. So this pandemic showed us how flawed our systems have been. It showed us how little we have invested in health, research, community empowerment, and public health, all of which are foundations in order to address this problem. We've also seen how disenfranchising misinformation can be, that as though to turn over with COVID has been at research with COVID has been at an exceptionally and miraculously fast rate. We have also seen the rapid rise of anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, and a whole lot of people who still do not believe in the reality of this. So all of these have again reminded me of how diseases are more than just the disease. So it is multifactorial, as our professors have always emphasized to us. So it entails analyzing the genetic and medical aspects, predisposing one to the disease, the social, economic, and cultural impact, making one vulnerable, the leadership of a country, and access to healthcare, among many others. And so we also realize that it takes more than just one sector to end this pandemic. It takes people from different expertise to come together and share their knowledge to address the problems that we see during this pandemic. So, this has been the heart of the org as we started brainstorming this event. We thought that it would be equally important that we hear how the different sectors, research, clinics, local responses, and public health are responding. So maybe if we can see them together, we can see the bigger picture and we can fully see how complex the problem is. And when we understand the problem, then we can address it. So here in PSA, we always believe that science is meant to be shared with the people. So MedEureka has always been one of the things that we do to help bridge this gap. And as you may have observed, the importance of making people understand the valuable knowledge. So the importance of bridging this gap has not been any more evident than during these times. So it is our hope that with this conference, you will learn and more importantly understand the disease, its impact, the actions being taken in order to address it, and what we are still lacking. So dare to discover with us, dare to learn, and dare to ask. Good morning, everyone, and hoping for a fruitful day with all of you.
Okay, thank you very much, Miss Cando, for that inspiring message. That message made us even more excited for today's sessions. For this morning, we will have four speakers to talk about public health and COVID-19 response. But before we proceed, may we remind everyone of our house rules. Please don't forget to mute your microphones. During our open forum sessions, again, please don't forget to mute your microphones. Okay. During our open forum sessions, please course your questions through our Slido for me to read for our speakers. Don't forget to indicate the name of the speaker the question is directed to. Our Slido code is 781601. You may also upvote questions that speak your curiosity aloud. Again, the Slido code is 781601. As greatly encouraged, you also have the option to raise your question personally by raising your hand in Zoom for me to acknowledge. Questions through the Zoom chat may also be directed to the MedEureka Q&A. Now, without further ado, let's start with the first session on public health. Let me introduce our first speaker. Our speaker obtained his Bachelor of Science in Molecular Biology and Biotechnology and Doctor of Medicine degrees from the University of the Philippines. He is a health system specialist with a Master of Science degree in Health Systems and Public Policy from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He has over a decade of experience in global public health at the local and international levels, having worked with USAID, WHO, as well as health officers at all levels. He uses a health system strengthening lens in advising ministries of health, social health insurance agencies, national and local government authorities, development partners, healthcare providers, and patient groups. He has worked on health system functions in the context of various diseases and pandemic response, particularly COVID-19. Everyone, let's welcome Dr. Albert Domingo for his talk entitled Where and What Are the Lesions? Examining Our Health System Through COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Renzo, and good morning to the UP Physician Scientists Association. Medyo nagulat ako nung binasa ni Renzo yung introduction. Alam niyo yung sa FDA, yung ito ay hindi gamot at hindi nakakadila siya nag-speed up. But anyway, having heard that, so good morning. It's a lovely Saturday, and I cannot say no to my alma mater, any aspect, whether students or faculty. And it is a pleasure and honor to be here and in your forum, in your webinar. And I love it that the discussion is focused not only on the clinical aspect, as I understand that most of you are MD PhDs students. I'm also a frustrated molecular medicine. As you heard din sa background, so yes, I do understand your language, pero yung GPA ko hindi umabot dun sa cutoff. Joke lang. But having said that, here we are, and I'm going to speak about the public health aspect of this particular response. And I'm going to use a little bit of the language that the organization, the PSA, is familiar with. Although, you might be wondering, why does it sound like we're back in neuro? Ano bang subject number ng neuro ngayon first year? But I think it's still the same, no? When you're in first year medical school, whether it's the traditional curriculum, which our class was the last one, if you're curious, class 2008. And then everyone after class 2009, ano na, OSI. But I think it's still the same. Neuro has always been integrated when they started. So the first question that everyone always loves to ask sa preceptorial, where is the lesion? And then, di ba, as you proceed to the second year and so on, what is the lesion? And so on and so forth. I'm coming from that perspective in discussing the health system through COVID-19 because it's very difficult to understand what exactly is the health system. Yan. Coming from someone who was trained in his undergrad at the molecular level, molecular biology, and then in medical school at the organ system level or at the physical level, the individual, and later on in master's training, in master's degree in postgrad in the UK at the systems level, there really is a need to understand or to concretize what we mean by the system. But before we go into that detail, first, I'd just like to set some terms up, kumbaga, to make it uniform definition of terms. No? When we speak of universal health coverage, you might be wondering, bakit biglang nag-shift si Doc Albert into UHC? Well, it's not really a pause that the pandemic has been causing when it comes to the advocacy for universal health care or universal health coverage. In fact, if there is a reason to pursue this, it's the pandemic. So universal health coverage or universal health care as we know it in the local setting is about all people having access to quality health services without suffering the financial hardship associated with paying for care. Sa Tagalog, lagi kong sinasabi nung ako'y nag-advocate pa for the UHC bill back in 2018 until it became law in 2019, there are just two questions. Dalawang tanong lang ang iniisip ng isang pasyente sa PGH-ER or kahit anong ER or kahit anong OPD. Una ay, gagaling ba ako? At ikalawa, magkano babayaran ko? Often, the questions get reversed. The first question they ask, which will lead them to not go to care, is magkano ba ang babayaran ko? Magkano ba gagastusin ko? So those two things are the main questions that we try to address, that we try to fix, so to speak, whenever we work with health systems. And the question when it comes to health systems becomes, sino ba yung pasyente ng isang health systems practitioner? So yan, favorite ko rin yung subukan sagutin when my parents ask me, what exactly do you do, Albert? Ano bang ginagawa mo? Di ba pinag-aral ka namin ng medicine? Bakit wala kang mga pasyente? Wala kang nakikita mga pasyente at hindi ka nagsusuot ng lab coat at hindi ka nagsusuot ng stethoscope? Sabi ko, well, ma, Nung undergrad kami, tinatanong niyo ako kung ano yung mga molecules, ano yung mga pinag-uusapan namin sa MBB. Ngayon, mas mahirap yung tanong, anong ginagawa ng health systems? So, the molecular biology part is probably here at the metabolic pathways, the genes. This is where we understand molecular medicine when you combine it so that you understand more of that and you are able to influence morbidity and mortality. Health systems, we step back a bit more or we step to the left a bit more and we start dealing with behaviors, health interventions, and the environment where we are working in or living in, or the occupation of the patient. How do we intervene? Well, those are big things, the behaviors, health interventions, environment, and occupation. That's where we start tinkering. Wag naman saan ng tinkering, no? That doesn't sound good. We start influencing, we start fixing the social, cultural, and economic norms. It could be through legislation, it could be through policies, and many other interventions. At the end of the day, however, we need to remember, di ba, ang ating favorite, kwento ni Rosario. Actually, kwento ni Rosario is a root cause analysis, no? I did not think of it that way when I was in first year, and then my comment professor, sila Dr. De La Paz, di ba, would start discussing parang, so bakit namatay si Rosario? So hindi siya si Rosario, obviously. Pero I just like to use this photograph I took a few years back. I was parked, don't worry, hindi parked, naka-stop yung sasakyan. But this is obviously along Taft Avenue, I think near Rizal Park. And this is symbolic of the many things that we want to fix. And having said that, what do we fix exactly? If you look at the continuum of care, you want to stay in the green box, which is the healthy box. But ultimately, we are all exposed to risks. We have contact with risks, which leads us to latent disease or injury, early disease. Could progress, could become advanced, might become chronic, and might lead to disease or impairment, and ultimately to death. Using the language of COVID-19, you could be healthy when you stay at home, but every time you go out, you expose yourself to the risk of getting the virus. And if you do get the virus, you get infected, you might be asymptomatic, which could also be in a way some form of latent disease. But if you develop symptoms, or some people don't even develop symptoms, they don't proceed like pre-symptomatic to symptomatic, talagang fully asymptomatic sila. So you can have the disease, di ba? It will progress. Wag naman sana maging moderate to severe. Maghahanap ka na ng kama, punong-puno ang mga ER. And then unfortunately, you will fall ill. Or even if you recover, we're starting to see a lot of literature published when it comes to what they say in the layman's terms, layperson's terms, as long COVID or chronic COVID. Still under study, still under kumbaga investigation. But that whole chain, the continuum of care from being healthy to wag naman sana mortality, we can influence using interventions, di ba? In public health, all of them are called prevention. Primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. Primary prevention is about reducing risk exposure. Secondary prevention, detecting and intervening early. Contact tracing, di ba? Let's do ano bang gusto niyong term? Mass testing or targeted testing or expanded testing? I don't care. It's all about testing more. It depends on whoever is saying it. Those are all political labels, but at the scientific core of it, it's about testing more. And because you want to detect and intervene early, that's the whole reason why we want to test more and isolate properly if we do find a COVID positive case. And then, of course, tertiary prevention, we have to reduce progress or complications of established disease using established treatments, di ba? Compassionate special use permit is not an excuse to say that it works. It only means that nothing else worked and this is the last resort and we don't even know if it will work. Behind all of that would be the resources, resource generation, financing, and also the governance or the stewardship of all that I mentioned. I'm going to show this only as a preview of what we are discussing, kumbaga cutting edge in health systems, so I won't go into the details. Pag sinabing market systems approach, hindi ibig sabihin pro-market na kagad. Ano ba yung market, di ba? The market simply means all of the actors out there. And then there's also this concept of the supply meeting the demand, di ba? If the supply is the test for COVID-19 RT-PCR, is it meeting the demand? Are the patients actually getting tested? What are the supporting functions? Are there laboratory skills and technology? Is there financing available for the RT-PCR laboratory? Is there information that will lead or influence the patients to actually seek RT-PCR over, say, rapid antibody tests? My goodness, hanggang ngayon may mga friends pa rin ako nagpapa-interpret ng rapid antibody test. but you have to explain to them patiently and carefully that it is useless from a clinical perspective if we come to the screening stage, because that will already talk about, di ba, disease of previous kumbaga occurrence, previous disease. Hindi na siya for current, or for current siya ginagamit ng mga ating mga clinicians pag ikaw ay naka-confine lang. But do you explain it that way to a patient? No, you don't. So the demand side information is also a supporting function that you have to do so that this supply and demand meets in terms of testing. And then you have the norms, the standards, the regulations, yung mga accreditation ng RT-PCR. Taxes, wala pa naman nagta-tax, ano, pero I mean, this maybe refers to the financial incentives or disincentives that the government can impose so that that testing will go on. Okay, now let's go to the subject matter, COVID-19. I'm showing you the epi curve, the epidemic curve, using the WHO dashboard. I had to extract this. Yeah, this is updated as of this morning. And the whole idea here is it's not so much the curve itself. Hindi pala nakalagay yung moving average, no? But you can just eyeball. No? So ito yung the curve or the waves, so to speak. Ano ba yung mga waves? I'm talking to an educated group of kumbaga, an audience, so I won't go into the details anymore. But what could be useful on this particular graph is if you diagram is if you superimpose the different kinds of quarantine. No? There are parang ansaya, no, what kinds of quarantine do you have? Alam nyo, pag generic name, there are just 4 levels. The UK just uses the numbers. Actually, most of the countries use them. So level 4, 3, 2, 1. Yung level 4 is the strictest. That is your ECQ in Philippine terms. Diba? The brand name in the Philippines is ECQ. The level 3 is your MECQ. The level 2 is your GCQ. And the level 1 is your MGCQ. Nasaan ba tayo ngayon? I think hindi ko pala na-update. Dapat may sliver na dyan na nakalagay na MECQ. Pero does it feel like a level 3 lockdown? I leave you to answer that question. But using this slide, we can somehow have kumbaga initial initial impression on whether or not the kind of quarantine we imposed for a particular period works or it's working the same way that it was done. Like, for example, the ECQ of last year compared to the ECQ of this year, diba? But I just wanted to show you this to somehow whet your appetite when it comes to using COVID-19 as the language or as the tracer or as the condition that we will use to examine what and where are the lesions when it comes to the problems. Let's talk about health system resilience. If we think of the human body as being healthy, if we are, ano ba ang definition ng health? Huwag ka nang pasukin yung classic formal definition na, di ba? It's not just the absence of disease or infirmity, but also wellness and all that. Sabihin na lang natin in objective terms, if you are physically healthy and mentally healthy, physically healthy, you do not have an unstable condition. Your vital signs at the clinical perspective are stable and you are not really kumbaga in need of urgent care, just for operational definitions lang. No? If you're mentally healthy, you also do not have any particular conditions or crisis at the moment that could result in harm to others or to yourself or to distress to yourself also. But from a health system perspective, what is a healthy health system? Parang ano, no, redundant. Healthy health system. Okay. So if you look at resilience, I think a healthy health system is one that is able to, from the perspective of COVID-19, prepare for and effectively respond to crises, maintain the core functions even as a crisis is ongoing, and informed by lessons learned during the crisis, organize if the conditions require it. It's about adaptation. If your health system is able to do this, diba, prepare, maintain and stay strong and stay working, stay functional during the crisis, and then adjust after the crisis hits based on evidence that you have gathered, then I think it's a healthy health system. This is, of course, context dependent and iterative. In health systems, we say context dependent. Ang mga clinicians, sabi ng clinicians, of course, each and every patient is different. You do not treat the laboratory values. You do not treat the chart. You look at the patient, you look at the clinical context. Kami rin. We have a context-dependent and iterative process. Yeah, you have to understand that you cannot just go to Cuba, copy the health system of Cuba, bring it to the Philippines, and say that's a good health system. Let's do it in the Philippines. Kasi not everything is the same between Cuba and the Philippines. You cannot just keep on praising Singapore because the population of Singapore is just half or three-quarters of Metro Manila. In the same way that you cannot adapt the Philippines to China because Beijing alone is already half of the Philippine population. And of course, the context is very different. So you have to have an advanced assessment of the system capacities and weaknesses. You have to know the investments that you will need for the vulnerable components before the crisis. You have to reinforce during the emergency, and you have to review performance after a crisis. Let's go through that one by one. No? So in the Philippines, in the context of COVID-19, nagkaroon ba tayo? Did we have an advanced assessment of our health system capacities and weakness? Leading question, Your Honor, yes, meron. Pero before I go into the details, kung merong biochemical pathway, o sige, simulan na lang natin sa pinaka-basic na parang the scourge of all medical students or anyone who went through biochemistry, the Krebs cycle. How many ATP are produced at the end? Which part? At the end, after this particular enzyme? Don't ask me, nakalimutan ko na siya. But kung merong Krebs cycle for biochemistry, meron ring, this is just a construct that I worked with DOH and PhilHealth to produce. Financing and service delivery cycle, no? So coming from the top, 'di ba? The money that people pay, the population pays taxes, including sin taxes, premiums to PhilHealth, and unfortunately, there's still a lot of out-of-pocket payment. Those are the orange lines, 'di ba? Those are the pathways for the money. It goes to the Department of Finance through the BIR, and then the DOF, the Treasury follows the budgeting according to Congress. Budget goes to DOH. The budget does not go to the PGH. No kidding. Actually, the budget does not go to the PGH because the DOH does not supervise the PGH. Diba? That's a nuance in this particular cycle. So what I'm trying to impart is there is really a lot of detail. There are a lot of details when it comes to the financing and service delivery of particular disease entities, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's malaria, filariasis, tuberculosis, and so on and so forth. And this is a very simplified diagram, no? We can tweak a lot on the financing side. We can also tweak a lot on the service delivery side, primary healthcare versus secondary care, and the ability or inability of patients to access primary care. And because what happens is they go straight to the private hospitals or to the public hospitals. I will not go into the details. We will be focusing on the question, where and what is the lesion? Oh, where is the lesion? Nasa Secretary of Health ba? Nasa regional office? Nasa provincial health office? Where is the lesion? If you will look at the system in terms of its organizational structure or its anatomy, so to speak, diba? You can already start answering the question, where is the lesion? Do not answer the question, who is the lesion? That is counterproductive because if you start blaming people, although at the end of the day, people really do run the system, but rather than take it to a personal level and ask who is the lesion, let's ask the question, where is the lesion? And then you start identifying. But when you do identify where the lesion is, you have to be very objective, you have to be very evidence-based, and do not just hate someone for the sake of hating or blaming. You have to know that you offer criticism to be constructive so that you can fix the system. After all, at the clinics, you don't go in front of your patient and start blaming your patient. Kayo kasi, kain ng mataba na pagkain, inom kayo ng inom ng alak, di ba? Kayo, napakaalat ng kinakain ninyo. You don't do that in front of your patient. Otherwise, your patient will no longer go back to you, or your patient's blood pressure will go up, and then he will probably have a heart attack or a stroke if he is predisposed to that, di ba? That is one of the reasons why health system practitioners, at least most of those whom I know who are heavily involved with the patients, we don't criticize our patients in the open. We do criticize them, but we do it in private. We do it speaking to them in private through private channels kasi hindi namin sila pinapahiya. Hindi mo pinapahiya dapat ang pasyente mo, but you should still tell your patient what needs to be fixed. So where is the lesion? Look at the diagram, and obviously there's still a break in between the DOH and our local health systems. So yan pa lang parang ano ba yan? Is that a break in the spinal cord, 'di ba? Parang the signals coming from the central office, tas biglang the lateral motor neurons are all firing on their own without signals from the top. I don't know. It's just a question that I want to ask. And then another thing that we need to diagnose, baka naman it's not about the nervous system, baka it's about the circulatory system, baka the blood is not reaching the particular organ that should be functioning for COVID-19 response. And when I say blood, it's all about the money. No, it's not the song all about the money. But yes, frankly speaking, money does make the world go round, diba? And I'm not saying that from a moralistic perspective. I'm just saying that from a purely health systems perspective, that you have to channel your financing correctly so that this graph does not look this way. What is this graph telling us? That big orange chunk is the out-of-pocket payment. The proportion of that chunk relative to the other colors tells you how much the Filipino family is paying for when it comes to health expenditures. Obviously, the graph is only up to 2014. I don't know if you extend it to 2019, and then when the pandemic hits at 2020, hindi ko alam. No one still knows. It would be curious to find out what the national health accounts, that's the NHA, which is the source of this data. The national health accounts, what will it tell us about the expenditures of the Philippines when it comes to healthcare for the year 2020? Hindi ganun kadaling i-compute yun, lalo na ngayon na medyo nag-pandemic tayo at ang daming mga expenditures na wala before. So all of that information tells us now what should be our roadmap towards answering the two questions. Gagaling ba ako at magkano ang babayaran ko? Yun yung UHC. Gagaling ba ako at magkano babayaran ko? Gagaling ba ako sa COVID ko at magkano ang babayaran ko? Yan. Napakahirap sagutin ng mga tanong na yan. And as I mentioned, there was already an assessment of the health system when it comes to crises before. In 2018, there was a joint external evaluation where experts did come and work with local stakeholders using a standard tool to review the national capacities across 19 technical areas related to health security. It was a multi-sectoral process performed as a peer-to-peer collaboration, and the report is actually published on the WHO website as of 2018, dated 2018. What were the recommendations? Sabi ng joint external evaluation or evaluators, there should be high-level political commitment and accountability to advance the implementation of the international health regulations. There should be a national action plan. There should be strong monitoring and evaluation practices. Are we doing that? Let's see. There should be an overall high-level multi-sectoral body with leadership from the health sector. Does this sound like the IATF? Maybe yes, but with the little conditions, because is it acting? Is the health sector really leading, or is it being overpowered by other sectors? Question mark. Foster institutional capacities and improve collaboration between national and subnational levels. Next question. Have there been investments in vulnerable components of the system before the crisis? And that brings us to the Universal Healthcare Act. How is that an investment? Well, not only the UHC Act, but also the sin taxes, diba, and so on. Do you notice that there was a strong negative reaction to the push by PhilHealth to increase premiums? Since 2019, when the law was signed, the UHC law did already say that the premiums will go up, but no one is really paying attention because until it starts hitting your wallet, people often do not react. Am I saying that the reaction is wrong? No, what I'm saying is it should have been communicated properly because people do not like being surprised with additional expenditures to the family budget. That's one thing. But is the increase necessary? My objective answer from a health system's perspective is yes. How do you plan to pay for all that needs to be done? And what needs to be done? So si financing is only one part of the 6 building blocks. You have, of course, everyone wants the people-centered integrated health services, but you need the essential medicines. Kailangan natin yung bakuna, di ba? Pag wala yung bakuna at wala tayong pambili ng bakuna, saan natin kukunin yung pambili para makapagbakuna tayo? Wala pa tong pandemic, obviously, hindi pa nakamask si ate dito. And then you need the health workforce. Kapag lahat ng health workforce mo ay naka-quarantine dahil pagod na sila, sino magpapatakbo ng mga beds? At pag ang beds mo ay hindi nakalink sa information systems kasi ang iyong stay safe ay hindi nakalink sa Manda track ba yun? QC, whatever. Ang daming iba-ibang contact tracing systems. Ang tanong, ano ba ang ginagawa ng governance and stewardship? Yan, 6 building blocks applied to COVID-19. Oh my goodness, there's another, cycle? No, it's not. It's just a schematic diagram of how the healthcare provider network should have been structured according to the UHC Act. Is this being done in the context of COVID-19? Yes and no. Yes, because there's actually a poly-issue once. No, because bakit nagkakaroon ng pila sa ER? Baka hindi na set up yung mga intermediate care, yung mga, what do you call this, isolation facilities, and so on and so forth. Yes, COVID-19 came and the president had to be swabbed. I don't know. Yan, di ba? Bakit? Diba, napaisip ako sa picture na to, no? Naka-full PPE si ating health worker, but the senator is not in full PPE. But anyway, having said that, the reinforcements, did they come during the emergency? So now that we are still in the emergency, a clinical sense of urgency and the system's grasp of operations are needed to beat COVID-19. Why am I showing a radioactive tracer going through the colon? Because COVID-19 is now showing us where the lesions are. Diba? Is there a lesion in this part of the response? Is there a lesion here in this part of the response? Kung ayaw nyo ng radio na analogy, gamit tayo ng cardio analogy. Yan, stress test. Diba? Patakbuhin natin si Philippine Health System at taasan natin ang number of active cases. Tignan natin kung hanggang saan pipiyok si Philippine Health System. Siya ba ay hihingi niya ng assistance o sasabihin pa rin niya na excellent ang aking functioning? Yan. Pero obviously, tingnan natin, dapat siguro kulayan natin ng konti yun to. The colon, diba? The colon or the running lady on the treadmill, this is what we want to see. And I'm talking to physician scientists, so siguro tinitignan nila, sabi nila, ay nako Doc Albert, alam na alam namin yan. The SEIR model and all the different steps that have to be adjusted. So just to go through it, dahil nag-alarm bells na, health promotion, diba? Makikita natin, where are the lesions? What are the lesions? Lahat yan. Behavioral risk reduction, what do you do? Is it working? Next, what about primary care? Diba? The testing. Is the isolation and the quarantine also working? Yan, sagutin natin yan. And then contact tracing, nag-work ba? Na-contact trace ba yung mga kilala nyo na naging COVID patients? O kayo na sumagot ng question. And then hospitals as the last line of defense. Yan, yes. PGH, OPGH. Yan. But behind the PGH, are there kumbaga established protocols? Are there enough HR and so on and so forth? This is supposed to be the pathway. Last year pa to. Pero ang tanong, bakit ngayon lang ini-engage yung mga hotel? Bakit ngayon lang gumagawa ng maraming facilities? Yan. So, na-expose ngayon, what are the lesions and where are the lesions? Saan sa PDITR? Actually, PDITT to pero PDITR nila sabihin na natin. Saan dito sa pathway na ito ng DOH ang lesion at ano yung lesion? And once we find out, or how do we find that out? We use a formal way of monitoring and evaluation. We monitor to answer the questions, what should be fixed and how can we do better? We evaluate to answer the questions, how bad is the problem? Where do we go now? And are the right people assigned to the right task? Back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Domingo, for the insightful and informative talk regarding the current state of the health system during the pandemic. We have learned so much from your system's perspective in assessing our country's COVID-19 response. So for the open forum, we will actually be having it after our next speaker. So again, if you have questions for the open forum later, you can send them to our Slido using this code 781601. Again, that's 781601. Or you can also save them to be personally asked to our speakers. Now, let us move on to our next speaker for public health. He is the Director for Research and Creative Work at the University of the Philippines Resilience Institute and is a member of the UP COVID-19 response team. He has a multidisciplinary background in urban planning and development. He earned his master's in environmental studies and his PhD in urban planning and development from the University of Tokyo. He has also received advanced training in disaster risk management, sustainable development, and environmental leadership, in over 18 years of progressive professional experience that encompasses teaching, research, capacity building, and knowledge management. He has worked in areas broadly crisscrossing climate and disaster risk management, policy analysis and reform, and collaborative governance. He has extensive publications in both academic and non-academic platforms. Let us now listen to Dr. Christopher Berse for his talk entitled Fortune Favors the Bold, COVID-19 Response in the Philippines from the Lens of Crisis Management.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Renzo, for that kind introduction. So as mentioned, I will be talking about our response to the pandemic from the perspective of crisis management. So let me just share my slide. I hope you can see it now. Okay, so to take it, you can look at my presentation as a take-off point from the earlier talk, very engaging talk by Dr. Domingo, and as he talks about lesions. And in this particular, for my part, I'll try to highlight those lesions and maybe, of course, solutions from the perspective of crisis management. Okay, so let me start off with the whole idea of what do we really mean by crisis, and what would differentiate it from a regular emergency or from another event. And when we talk about crisis, there are three basic elements that characterize a crisis. One is the severity of the impact, or the magnitude of the impact of a particular event. So if if it affects a community and there's a widespread disruption, for example, in the well-being or in the functioning of a particular community or a group of communities, then normally we treat that as not just your usual emergency, but something that's approaching a level of crisis. And of course, what makes crisis even more daunting is the fact that there's some element of uncertainty. We usually, when there's a crisis, we don't have a full grasp of information, and we don't have all the data at our disposal. So there's a level of uncertainty that we need to take into account when we're making decisions. So that's number two. And lastly, a crisis would require urgent action, something that cannot be delayed. And when a crisis occurs, usually, and as soon as we acknowledge that is an unfolding crisis, all hands are on deck, and all systems should be automatically deployed at the soonest time possible to ensure that we'll be able to sort of like contain the situation. So these three things are the critical elements of what would differentiate a crisis from other emergencies. Now, if we look at it in terms of COVID, clearly, the COVID-19 pandemic checks all of the three elements: the severity, the uncertainty, and the urgency. Okay. Now, but we should bear in mind that a crisis does not happen overnight. It's a product. Even the COVID-19 pandemic that we are in now, it's not just because 2020 happened. What we're going through is a product of years and years of I don't know. I don't want to say negligence, but years and years of systems that we have put in place, in the country. And I think that's the point that was made earlier by Dr. Domingo about our own, the progress that we have made in terms of policy, in terms of structures, and at the same time, of course, the challenges also. So what I'm trying to say here is that before actually a crisis could happen, there's an accumulation of hazards, of conditions that will eventually be highlighted or get highlighted once the crisis occurs, like what we are experiencing now, yung problems natin with healthcare, yung in terms of yung capacity and so on, in terms of leadership and so on. So all of these things, they would converge towards and become a crisis at some point when there's a trigger, and in our case, that's the virus. And but then again, not all situations evolve right away into a crisis. Sometimes we can contain a situation using our usual standard, operating procedures or protocols. Let's say merong isang aksidente, or merong isang medical emergency. Normally, as long as kumbaga it's not community-wide, there's no outbreak and so on, our emergency or even our SOPs can handle those kind of situations. But then again, when the impact starts to affect a wider community and we're not able to contain its spread, it can slowly escalate into a larger situation. Usually we will call that a disaster when we start to experience a number of casualties, for example, and there's impact on other sectors of society like infrastructure or economy and so on. And if we're not able to contain that, then that can effectively, of course, end up into a catastrophe. So what you would see on the screen is essentially the escalation, a simple schematic of how a crisis could evolve over time. Now, when we're dealing with a crisis, normally we start off with the three things here: the assess, the manage, and communicate. We of course we start off with assessing the risk, and that involves anticipating and even doing environmental scanning to sort of like uh, uh, anticipate a particular event before they could happen. In disaster risk management, we usually refer to this as the risk assessment part. So we look into the source of the hazard, we look into the possible exposed elements, the people, the development assets that might be affected by the hazard, and of course the vulnerability of those exposed elements. And then once you do a risk assessment, you should be able to sort of like communicate the findings of the assessment. And of course, the risk assessment will also inform your management approaches, how to manage the situation. And so these three, what I call as the three legs of crisis management. But what makes it even more challenging for crisis management is the fact that you have to deal with the three elements that I mentioned earlier. For the assessment and communication part, you should be able to capture the severity of the impact, and that has to be the threat has to be communicated clearly, and it has to be assessed clearly. And then at the same time, we should also be assessing the uncertainty that comes with the crisis, and and also take that into account, in managing the pandemic. And the last part, of course, is the urgency in terms of management and communication. Kasi in many cases, when communication lags behind, for one reason or another, normally that can control, that can divert the narrative of the crisis, and which eventually can also affect not only the perception of the people in terms of the effectiveness of the crisis management, but also can also affect people's compliance. If they see, for example, that there's no sense of urgency, or if that the interventions are not really being observed by those who are supposed to implement in the first place, then most likely they will also not follow, or comply with the policies. Now, when it comes to the pandemic management, of course, the literature would point out to at least to the need to contain the spread as soon as there's a local transmission, and then mitigate the impacts, especially the non-health impacts, the economic and other factors, and finally to eliminate through maybe long-term approaches, systems reform, and even through short-term interventions like vaccination and so on. And but the other element that we need to take into account is really the need for us to be able to recover and bounce back better, because it would be pointless to recover when we recover to the same state as before that made us vulnerable to the pandemic in the first place. So hopefully when you recover or bounce forward, the idea is that we should also be addressing the lesions that was mentioned earlier by Dr. Domingo. So, and when it comes to the pandemic, this is something that we're probably very familiar with, and this became popular as an earlier approach in last year, the hammer and dance approach. And I look at it in terms of from three phases. We usually employ the hammer policies during the survival phase, and primarily to protect the lives, and of course in context of other disasters, also the properties of people. And then as we move, as we're able to control the spread, now we can now transition towards maintaining maintaining the containment or by minimizing the impacts while waiting for long-term recovery options. And finally, the recovery phase. Now, in the Philippines, of course, we all know that the main outside of the medical interventions, the main approach of the government really is to impose community quarantine. And if you superimpose it with the three phases, usually we apply, so we have the ECQ, the MECQ, GCQ, and MGCQ. And these are the things that, supposedly there are variations sa mga ano na to. And what is tricky about the COVID is that unlike other disasters where the movement from the survival to transition to recovery is quite straightforward and linear, when it comes to COVID, we could easily fall back from transition back to survival phase. This is something that we have experienced recently with the reimposition, for example, of ECQ born out of the supposedly increase in cases. So, kumbaga, pwede magpabalik-balik ito. So, from survival to transition and recovery. And it's possible even that even when we're already in the recovery phase, we can still fall back to survival phase if there's a sudden outbreak in a particular community. So, this is the complexity of the pandemic. And we all know, and then if you look at it in terms of timeline, nakita natin yung fluctuations or variations in terms of how the government adopted the ECQ formula. We have, so from January, from the first imported case, up to the, to the present. Hindi ko na inisa-isa kasi halos ano lang naman, pabalik, nagta-transition lang naman tayo from ECQ to MECQ to GCQ to MGCQ. And to be honest, it's quite difficult now. I don't know with you, but it has become even more difficult to track the changes between ECQ and GCQ, not to mention, not only in terms of where they are being applied, but also in terms of the yung specific details, implications and differences in policies with respect to work, with respect to industries, with respect to restrictions in mobility and so on. So nagba-vary yun. So yung hammer natin, essentially, if to use the hammer and dance lingo, is the ECQ, primarily. And we have seen that being implemented paulit-ulit yung MECQ, at least yung variations niya. And by officially, of course, ang basihan ng pag-determine ng community quarantine in the early days of the management was this, the critical care utilization rate and the case doubling time. Eventually, we had to abandon this in favor of other metrics like we still maintain the utilization rate for critical care, and but we started using the attack rate instead of the case doubling time eventually. But so ito yun supposedly ang basihan on which areas to put under a GCQ or ECQ, and it's different variations, two other variations. Ngayon, for the dance, of course, ito na yung paglalaro natin from yung transition from ECQ to MECQ, GCQ, or MECQ and different other levels. And usually, the idea is that we're able to implement these changes at the lower level. We won't be declaring it at a regional level or at a wide scale to ensure that the impact on the economy will not be so massive. And so the NTF, for example, as early as April last year, they have already come up with the so-called zoning stages. That you have the critical zone, the containment zone, and each zone will have their own, quarantine protocols. And by by according to the plan, the declaration of the zones will depend on the number of cases, in the area per 100,000 population. That was the plan. And eventually, of course, the implementing structure for that, for the overall COVID response management is the itong naalam natin na IATF NTF system, where that's basically adapting the incident command system at the national level. You have the IATF providing strategic policy guidance, and you have the NTF COVID-19 providing operational management through the NDRRMC structure and the Office of Civil Defense, and then the actual response on the ground taken by the happens at the provincial level, at the regional, provincial, and the city municipal level, with the LGUs in the front line. So that's the tactical concept. Now we all know, of course, that so given that context, in terms of our institutional response, this brings us to some of the observations that I would call them our boldness, or boldness number one. And so remember, the title for this presentation is really about how our, whether fortune favors the bold. So we have, so our boldness number one is our approach to use the IATF structure in responding or in managing the COVID-19 crisis. We all know that not only the IATF, but also the fact that it is largely military driven, driven by military people. Diba? So parang ganun. Although you have the DOH secretary there, most of those who are the management is also largely dominated by military personnel. So you have so that alone has led to the structure of the IATF, as you can see in the earlier slide, is largely national centric, national government centric. The local governments are primarily seen as implementers, but most of the decisions, the policy guidance comes from the top. And the problem with the IATF is that, and I think this was also reflective of if you remember the graphic shown earlier by Dr. Domingo about the disconnect from the regional to the LGU level in our healthcare system. And that is also used. The IATF structure suffers from the same. Because as a DOH-led structure or created structure, the IATF stops at the regional level. The implementation, so the DILG had to create another layer of COVID task forces from the provincial down to the municipality, all the way to the barangay, to implement, to roll out the policies and the directives coming from the IATF. So merong ganong gap in terms of link. And so that's basically the main, and aside from the fact that it's largely military oriented. And the second striking feature in our approach is the fact that we're almost caught empty-handed when it comes to the pandemic, and it's not just really on the side of at the national level, because by law, for example, at least by executive order in 2014, we're already supposed to come up with the preparedness manual for emerging infectious diseases, and also to come up with a national response plan for pandemics, but we don't really have that. And at the local level, we have no contingency plan for pandemics, and in most local DRRM plans, the pandemics are not really incorporated, no, in the planning process. So it's probably that it's possible that we are we have been blindsided by other hazards, and so because of that, we do not have a clear, for example, we have to have clear response system. So we had to practically kumbaga, improvise from our existing structures, and more or less in terms of from the beginning, we didn't really have a clear inventory of our resources and needs with response to the pandemic. And one area that we're missing really is in the planning stage. When it comes to dealing with natural hazards and man-made conflicts, for example, it's already clear that we have to adapt the incident command system and of course the contingency planning approach in crisis management. When it comes to so we have a unified system already, but when it comes to dealing with a biological hazard like COVID-19, we didn't really have a system for that, especially at the local level. There's a disconnect between the region, the national structure and the structures at the local level. Okay, we have not adapted. So the third point has something to do with our recklessness. We tend to be shooting from the hips. And again, this is related to the confusing guidelines, the top-down decision-making, and practically new structures that are not clearly defined, especially at the beginning, that do not have a clear linkage with what works and what local governments are using in dealing with disaster risk management at the local level. So as you can see in the structure, the LGUs are merely seen as implementers of the policies, and we can see this even in the early reaction of the DILG. The first thing that they did is to come up with a memorandum circular, practically designating or giving or ordering the local chief executives or the mayors and the governors to do all of these things, which somehow is reflective also of the fact that kumbaga, we didn't have a clear system yet at the time. Ideally, moving forward, we should be already have a more or less a systematic structure at responding to a sick crisis like the COVID-19, like this one. And the fourth point has something to do with the fact that we tend to fly blind this time, especially, and this has something to do with the way we use and apply data in the policy and decision making. We tend to there's even a tendency to to fit tailor fit our data to fit to suit a certain narrative, di ba? And meron tayo ding one size fits all approach. And the way we this is critical because data can influence the credibility and trust of the institutions that they implement the responses. And once the credibility and trust are broken, there's a greater tendency that not only that people will tend to not comply with the policies, the impact or the effectiveness of the policies will also be perceived generally in a negative light. And so we have seen that as an impact. We have seen all these issues, this conflict between national and local governments, even violations of protocols, even from among officials, high-ranking officials, senators, the PNP people, mayors. There's even a point where some mayors would question the decisions and directives of the IATF. So merong ganong conflict And to some extent, even people start questioning the logic of some of the some of the directives from the IATF, from the government. So in terms of impact, we can see, of course, that starting in March, we have seen the rise in cases, and I think the government also admitted that it's partly related to the fact that we have also relaxed our yung yung PDITR especially doon sa testing and tracing component, and also yung relaxation and mobility among the public, and of course the introduction supposedly of the new variants. But there are other impacts that are beyond health, and that includes, of course, the continuing vulnerability and stigmatization of certain groups, especially, and this is actually the reason why we have the reintegration system. Of course, the public disruption, the weakening of state capacity, and also the damage to institutions. And this is something that seems to be also the main preoccupation of the government at some point, and sometimes to its own detriment. No? So there are, because of reputational risk issues, no? That's related to government and public sector organizations, that also tends to question the legitimacy of certain policies and even the credibility of certain political personalities that's leading the response. And this is a point I made also earlier. So as a way to conclude, kasi I only have 1 minute na lang daw. What we can see is that there's a lot of improvisation so far pre-pandemic structures. Remember, the IETF is not exactly a new structure. It was instituted in 2014, as one of the learnings from SARS. And we have, but then again, because it wasn't widely adapted yet, when pandemic happens, there had been a lot of operationalization issues when we activated the system, and we were not able to strategically link it with our existing structures for crisis management and disaster management in the country. And so while there has been improvisations at the national level, there were also local innovations, local governments that wanted to control the pandemic on their own. Of course, some of them ran into problems with national regulation. So there were issues, there were conflicts, and we have seen also how the conflicts were resolved, sometimes in favor of the LGU, sometimes not. So there's a lot of variation also in terms of the interpretation of the policies. And we have also seen the predominantly command and control approach, especially to manage the reputational risks. And we have seen what we might call elite panic in the literature. There's this fear that there will be public disorder. That's why we have been reading and seeing this, narrative very often, the narrative of the pasaway, for example. And there's also lack of deference to on-the-ground information sources and local expertise. So again, this has led to some conflicts in terms of the data, in terms of the implementation of certain policies. And the other aspect has to do with the uncertainty. We have not really taken full advantage of the scientific community's contribution. While we have a technical working group, for example, on data analytics and data governance and so on, at the end of the day, the question really is who makes the final decision, and what are the main considerations? Is it really the epidemic trend, or are there other things that we value more than the epidemic trends, than public health? And of course, we also still encounter the problems with transparency and data still persists up to even 1 year after. And lastly, the point I'd like to make has something to do with our capacities. We need to start anticipating the compounding hazards, let's say typhoons. We have seen that last year, when there was an when there have been typhoons. So how do we manage a pandemic in the midst of a typhoon or an earthquake, for example, or other disasters for that matter? And then we need to start thinking also about planning for the next pandemic. Because after all, COVID-19 is not exactly a black swan event. No? It's not something that happens rarely. No? In fact, in the past 10 years or 20 years, it has happened more than twice already. No? A similar event. So at the end of the day, the question really is, what will happen next? No? Are we gonna, as a people, are we gonna push for reform, or are we gonna continue accepting the status quo? And I'm asking this in the context not only of the upcoming elections, but also in the context of the governance. What do we do now that we know as in the language of Dr. Domingo, the lesions in our systems? Are we going to push for the highest level, the realignment of policies and institutions, or are we just going to opt for symbolic gestures but not substantive change, or maybe even accept the status quo and impose no change at all? I think that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Burse, for that very comprehensive talk regarding the country's COVID-19 response. We have learned so much from viewing. From our country's COVID-19 response from a crisis management perspective. An important takeaway we had from your session is that a crisis is definitely not born overnight. So at this point, we will have a 20-minute open forum for the first two talks of Dr. Domingo and Dr. Burse. Again, you may send your questions through Slido. Go to slido.com and enter the code shown on your screens and in the Zoom chat. Don't forget to indicate the speaker that it is directed to. If you would want to speak, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and wait to be acknowledged by the moderator before unmuting yourself. Kindly introduce yourself before giving your question. If possible, please also turn on your cameras while speaking. You may opt to send your questions to MedEureka Q&A through the Zoom chat as well. Okay, so now looking at our Slido board, we actually have a good amount of questions, so I think it would help if we begin now. So our first question is directed to Dr. Burse. So the question goes, I am curious po, what made you go to crisis management? And for those who want to pursue this career path, what is your advice for them?
Okay. I don't know. Maybe I would say serendipity. Because when I was doing my master's work, I was doing risk perception, primarily in the context of earthquakes. And then over time, because crisis management is essentially a cousin of disaster risk management. And the more you delve into disaster risk management, you would realize that many of the things actually in disaster risk management are also related, would have compounding effects on other areas, even in areas related to crisis. So parang it's not exactly a plan. What I'm trying to say, it's not a planned career path, but it's sort of like led me there, and I think it's also partially because of my experience. I've been to, well, aside from in the Philippines, we all have all these kinds of problems when it comes to crisis and natural hazards. Sabi ko nga palagi, ang Pilipinas parang 7-Eleven ng disasters and crisis. Di ba? Parang 24/7, year in, year out. We have all kinds of problems, no? Including political crisis. Pag sinama po political crisis, mas malaki problema. Di ba? But we have all of these things. So it's almost like a natural, but if you want, there's an area actually na kailangan din talaga natin, especially when it comes to mga public health, emergency or crisis managers na merong ganung lens. No? Kasi right now, yun yung medyo hindi pa, at least sa Pilipinas, no? hindi pa gaanong naka-mainstream ang some of the principles in crisis management and disaster risk management sa public health sector. For example, yung contingency planning, yung ICS system, we have only started mainstreaming it within the national health, yung mga different organizations natin sa DOH and sa LGUs. In the past 2-3 years pa lang. So hindi pa talaga ganun ka. No? So there's a real opportunity, no, for us to really link together. And partly because, sorry, napahaba na, no? Partly because, yun nga, yung system again, no? Largely ang health system kasi natin, national driven pa din. Whereas crisis and disaster dapat ay local, no? Local kasi ang dapat nasa conflict. So kailangan mag-marry yung dalawa. And if you want, that can be a real good area. Pwede natin tingnan.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So I hope that answered the question of our anonymous person. So now, the next question is directed for Dr. Domingo. So the question goes, since hospitals should be the last line of defense, how can UHC assist or strengthen the responses, COVID or not, in the communities and LGUs?
Thanks for that question. And we go back to this concept of primary care without the health. Kasi di ba may primary health care, may primary care. Primary health care is the entire approach, bridging everything from the community all the way to the hospitals. Primary care is the first point of contact. I think if there is one thing that that we are learning now is that the one hospital command has lost command. It has not lost command, but it has been overwhelmed. It's been overwhelmed. I know the people behind OHCC. They're hardworking and pagod na pagod sila. Sabi nga nila, the volume of calls came in, and that is a proxy indicator of the demand for health services in the community. Diba? Balik tayo sa market systems approach. Parang it's all about supply and demand. The supply would be the health service. The demand would be the people saying, kailangan ko ng doktor or kailangan ko ng health service. Ano man yun, doktor, nurse, or bakuna or something. The fact na tawag ng tawag, and those who are in marketing of commercial products know this. The fact na ang daming tumatawag, ibig sabihin, ang daming gustong bumili. Diba? Pag sinabing bumili, I'm using market language not because I'm saying dapat may presyo. What I'm just saying is, ang daming may kailangan. So, the primary care approach, kahit pa ulit-ulit din natin sinasabi, hindi siya yung, hindi siya yung romanticized na nasa gitna ako ng rural health unit sa isang malayong baryo. Totoo yon, primary care yon. Pero what the One Hospital Command is telling us that even in Mega Manila, in highly urbanized Metro Manila, sira yung primary care. So parang yung advocacy natin, hindi natin sasabihin na parang, kailangan magpadala tayo ng doctors to the barrios. Wait lang. Baka doctors to the villages ang hindi ko sinasabi. Baka kailangan doctors to the Metro Manila areas ang kailangan kasi mismo sa Metro Manila, alam niyo ako nga public health practitioner. I'm not a clinician per se, but I'm still licensed. And when the surge happened, my gosh, ako mismo sumasagot ng mga tanong on the phone. Not through any formal system. Hindi ako nag-partner with DOH, hindi ako nag-partner with VP Lenny. Just friends calling out of frustration, out of fear. Albert, okay bang kumonsulta sa'yo? Alam nga namang sabihin kong hindi. But what I'm saying is, sobrang overwhelmed na kami mismo na hindi traditionally tinatawagan for clinical services. Parang, okay, bring in the reinforcements. Kumbaga, matagal na kaming hindi marunong gumamit ng barel using the military analogy, pero kailangan na ngayon kasi overwhelmed. So, primary care. Back to you, Renzo.
Thank you very much, sir. So now our next question is for Dr. Berse. So the question goes, given how militaristic our COVID response is, how do you think can we adjust to the lapses in the management or structure of the IATF?
Okay. It's a naka-record tayo, di ba? Mahirap sagutin yung kasi if you were to ask me, di ba, there have been quarters even lobbying for the abolition na lang of the IATF. Because if it's highly militaristic then and it's not serving the purpose, maybe it's time to rethink if it's not working. I think maybe really moving forward, no, I think one way to go about it is really just to focus our efforts on strengthening the response at the local level. Because I think that's where the fight really will be. No? And in fact, if you think about it, medyo pampagulo lang naman yung mga minsan parang pampagulo na lang yung mga national level na ano, di ba? I mean, I know there's also a lot of work going on, pero kumbaga, the actual battle happens at the local level. So I would say we look at it that way, no? Instead of looking at the weaknesses at the national. And because remember, these are president appointed people. You cannot really do so much about it unless the president is not happy with them anymore. Right? So to counter that really would be to support even more efforts at the local level, where it's not so military oriented. Yeah.
Renzo, may I chime in on the same question, please?
Sure, sir.
Yeah. So, actually, in support of what Dr. Berces said, gusto ko rin kasing ma-clarify, maybe what the public is reacting to is the optics of military presence. Meaning, may sundalo, may mga ganyan, may mga baril. Yun yung ayaw natin. But did you know that the incident management system or the incident command system, it's actually militaristic in the sense na it's a command and control system without the guns, without the ano. It just means when the incident commander says, this is the decision, execute, that's very military. And wag na tayo lumayo. Tayong mga nasa PGH, kayong lahat na nasa medical school ngayon, di ba? Hirap na hirap tayo magtawag ng isang senior natin na nag-graduate from a higher class na hindi mo siya tatawagin na doc, sir, or ma'am. Diba? It's built into the medical system. All of us doctors are actually militaristic. Oh my God, did Doc Albert just say we are militaristic? Yes. Bakit tayo nag-yes sa mga seniors natin? Bakit tayo tumatahimik pag nagsalita na yung pinaka-senior consultant sa loob ng endorsement rounds? Kaya nyo bang questionin yon? Kahit evidence-based ang ating campaign, syempre tatahimik ka na lang. Alangan naman sabihin mo sa attending mo na, sir, you're wrong. Court martial. Hindi ka mako-court martial, pero medyo mapapagalitan ko or something. In other words, and there is a function to that. Look at the surgical theater. Bakit tayo merong captain of the ship doctrine? My golly, why do you call the surgeon the captain of the ship? Because the ship has to sail. When the surgeon is operating in the theater, that is a little incident command system going on there. Pag sinabi ng surgeon dun sa nurse, knife, pag binigyan ka ng scissors, titingin yung surgeon dun sa nurse, yung old school, babatuhin niya. Hindi, mali yun, mali. Mali yun ang babato ng instrument. Pero in reality, that little parang incident na nagagalit yung surgeon at tinignan ka ng nakaganon, pag masama na yung tingin sa'yo, kasi baka mamatay yung pasyente. Eh. That sense of urgency is the good military thing that we want. We do not want the guns. We do not want the idea of punishment, the narrative, as Dr. Bursa said, na parang mga pasaway kayo. We don't want that. But we do want the honorable, the gentleman, the lady in command, di ba? Yun ang kailangan natin from the militaristic perspective. Over to you, Renzo.
Thank you very
If
much.
I may add lang, Renzo,
Yes,
no,
sure,
pagdating nga sa incident command system, ideally siguro one way of doing yung sinuggest ni Dr. Domingo is maybe to kumaga start thinking about, kasi right now the incident commander, we can see that it's the military. That's the thing. No? But maybe if we put somebody instead of somebody na military, if we put, let's say, a public health person, no, mas na siguro that can already solve one big problem, no, in terms of optic, but more importantly in terms of actually understanding the whole situation, no, na hindi lang ano, but tama po yun, no, yun naman talaga ang system nga. But maybe in terms of leadership, yun yung kailangan equip natin at the national level. But then again, that's something kasi na that's in the hands of the president. So kung sino yung pinagkakatiwalaan niya na kayang isolve yung problema. Remember, nung nagkaroon ng problema sa Cebu, nagkaroon ng surge. Diba, ang pinadalangan niya si troubleshooter ng administration. Si DNR Secretary si Matu. No? And he was able to actually control the situation in Cebu. Nagkaroon ng order, di ba? So it's not entirely wrong also. There are really just, so siguro nga largely optic, but also there are also elements na medyo questionable yung approach. So yun lang, gusto ko lang idagdag. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. So the next question is for Dr. Domingo. In the slide, regarding programs implemented for controlling COVID, prevent, detect, isolate, quarantine, test, treat. Which of these categories is the limiting step?
Okay, siguro para malinaw, yan. Ito yun eh. Yan, which is the limiting step.
Mhm.
Prevent, detect, isolate, quarantine, test, treat. Siyempre, pag sinabi kong treat, magagalit sa akin ng PGH. What I'm saying is, I think all of them have kumbaga relative shares in the gaps, no? Lahat sila meron eh. Kasi yung prevention, minsan alam mo ako talaga, this is my personal opinion, I will still comply with regulations, but I don't really believe in the face shield. Because if you go out there, parang ang tawag ko nga doon forehead shield eh. Nakalagay siya sa ibabaw ng forehead. O kaya, alam niyo yung parang bishop's mitre, nakalagay siya sa likod ng ulo. Nakakita na inis ako sa ganun. Kasi parang ako, when I follow that regulation, I follow it to the letter, I wear it in front of my face. But people, parang anyway, so nag-rant na ako dun sa prevent. Punta tayo sa detect. Contact tracing, ang pinakamalaking rant ko dyan, bakit ang daming apps? Ba't kailangan ko mag-download kay LGUA, download kay LGUB, punta kay Mall A, Mall B? Pwede bang isa na lang? 'Di ba? Okay. Kay isolate or quarantine, ako ba magpapa-isolate or quarantine ba ako kung alam kong dadalhin ako sa isang hindi gaanong sanitary, quote unquote. Sorry my privilege showing. My social class is coming out. I'm from a middle class. I'll just be frank about it. Do not expect someone coming from my social class to actually be enticed to go to a quarantine facility na hindi suited sa quote-unquote standards. Nag-i-air quotes ako kasi yun nga eh, that's the reality on the ground, di ba? Parang if you want people to actually follow a policy issued at national level, make sure it is also suited for the context of the person or the families that you want to follow this particular guidance. Testing, nako, wag na natin pasukan yung testing, alam niyo na yung problema. Treatment, sige, i-touch na lang natin yung confusion about the different treatment modalities, bakit pinapayagan si Remdesivir, bakit si Ivermectin hindi, yung misunderstanding on what compassionate special use means. So to answer the question, wala akong ma-single out na isa, but if you will rephrase the question na, if you were to prioritize which one to work on para sakaling medyo magkaroon tayo ng progress, I think it's still the detect and the isolate, the DI, which is the contact tracing and also the testing. Kasi this is a disease na wala pa siyang established treatment eh. Even the dexamethasone, which has support in a randomized clinical trial, is just symptomatic treatment. It does not eradicate the virus. Until such time comes, we really have to detect, test, and then isolate and quarantine fast. Back to you, Renzo.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So the next question is for Dr. Berse. The COVID-19 pandemic won't likely be the last pandemic in our lifetime. Do you think we're doing anything in anticipation of future pandemics?
Well, I would say that right now, no, kasi we're still in the middle of the battle. Eh. So, and given the, if we look at the directives at the national level or even at the local, nandun pa rin tayo. So we're not yet, hopefully, no, we're not yet at the stage of harvesting the lessons. Although we're trying to learn as we go along, but we don't have yet a long term. But there are efforts now, I believe, with DOH and other agencies, even with the OCD, no, to sort of harvest the lessons, and so that we can integrate all of this into our overall crisis management structures and disaster risk management processes.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So this next question is actually directed for both Dr. Domingo and Dr. Berse. So maybe Dr. Domingo can answer first and then Dr. Berse next. So the question goes, the pandemic does not affect everyone equally. What can we do for the most vulnerable members of society? So,
Nako, hirap niyan. Yan yung parang ano yan candidate number 24, Philippines. Ayan. So, ang hirap ng question na yan kasi okay, I begin with this meme, 'di ba? There was a time na sinasabi we are all in the same boat. Tapos may counter meme na lumabas, no, we're not in the same boat, we're in the same ocean. And I agree, no? Parang the boats that we are all in are different. Yung iba sa atin nasa battleship, yung iba sa atin nasa yate, yung iba sa atin nasa bangka. Pero lahat tayo nasa malakas na alon ng ocean around us. And how do we fix this inequity? I'll just say it outright. There is an inequitable situation. I mean, from that naval analogy, then therefore those who are in the very vulnerable boats, yung mga nasa bangka, sana man lang i-offload na sila, kunin na sila ng mga nasa malalaking vapor, di ba? And that's exactly what a sailor who is at sea at a stormy ocean would do. When someone who is in a ship, in a boat about to sink, makes a mayday call, whoever is out there, whether it's a battleship, it's a commercial liner, it's a cruiser, the captain, by maritime law, if I'm not mistaken, they have to drop everything and respond to that call. Because the idea here is no one else out in the open ocean will save you except another human being, whatever that human being's position in life is. So adapting it to the COVID-19 situation, this is where, okay, alam kong gasgas na, bayanihan. This is where bayanihan comes in. And by saying, kaya exasperated ako kasi parang nagiging symbolic siya, nagiging pang tarpaulin lang siya. Drop the tarpaulins, drop the symbolisms, and just do it. Lumalabas yung frustration ko eh. Kasi parang, ano ba? Parang bayanihan, kailangan pa bang mag-remind tayo na overwhelmed na mga ospital bago mag-open up ang mga hotels? Wala rin naman sila mga negosyo the past how many months kasi naka-quarantine tayong lahat. So wala rin naman mga pupunta. So open up na, di ba? Does it take a legislative directive? Bayanihan 1 actually includes the president can take over private facilities kung kailangan. Hindi na dapat may ganun. Wala nang takutan. Bayanihan na. Di ba? May nagme-mayday na. Buti nga ngayon nangyayari na. So the nice thing is, after 1 year, nare-realize na ng mga tao, ay, kailangan pala talaga mag-chip in. Pero meron pang mga areas. Testing. My gosh, testing. Kailangan pa ba maglagay ng price cap? Wag na po. Wag na tayo maglagay ng price cap. Mag-voluntary na tayo. Wag na tayo mag-mark up. Diba? Alam ko naman na everyone has to pay the bills at the end of the day. Siguro break even na lang. Pero para yung kumita pa sa testing, wag na. O kung gusto niyo kumita, pagkakitahan niyo yung mga nagte-testing para na mag-international travel or pumunta sa beach, yun ang pagkitahan ninyo. Pero yung mga pasyente na talagang legit na naka-confine na kailangan matriage, kung pwede nga sana libre na eh, 'di ba? Shout out to PGH na kapag ka senior citizen libre kasi gagamitin nila yung PhilHealth sa yung senior privileges. Sana ganun lahat, 'di ba? Sana all. Back to you, Renzo.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, Dr. Berse, could you please?
Actually, I agree 100% with what Dr. Domingo said. Ano? Yeah, I think there are two sides. No, the government really has to do preferential parang programs to implement. Yun naman yung principle, no, behind the SAP sana ideally. Diba? But even the SAP, remember, people are questioning it. Bakit mo bibigyan yung mga walang trabaho or ganyan? No? So there's that sense of problem also on the side of the larger public. And I think that kind of thinking has to change. And it's related, syempre, doon sa konsepto nga nabanggit na about the bayanihan thing. So, for me, really, I think the intention is there. No? The intention to help the vulnerable is there on the side of the government. But in terms of actually putting our money where our mouth is, and that's the problem because other factors, other considerations come into the picture. And so, because for example, we had the UHC, for example, is supposed to help that, diba? May mga ganun naman ng mechanisms, but the implementation is quite problematic. And if we really want, no, for me, it's a matter of prioritization. And if we really want it to happen, to prioritize the vulnerable, the general public needs to put more pressure on the government, to keep on pressuring the government to provide services and goods that the vulnerable sector needs. Because there's this thinking that, or this theory, no, in policy making, na yung mga vulnerable, in most of the times they won't really have the time and the energy to push for their own agenda, for their needs anymore. So somebody has to speak up for them. So siguro yun yung pwedeng maging role ng, if I may say, ng ibang groups na hindi naman wala doon sa vulnerable sector. Yun lang.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So actually, there's still a lot of other questions for both of you po. So, but unfortunately, we don't have enough time. So what we will do, we will be emailing these questions to you po. And then if you could reply to them, we will forward your answers to those who asked them po. So thank you very much po. So that's it for our open forum this morning. So to our speakers, we'd want to invite you for a certificate awarding later before we end this morning's session. So again, thank you to everyone who sent their numerous questions in our Slido account. Let's now move on to our 10-minute break. Okay, so do you know about those bingo bingos that you've seen in FB and IG stories of your friends? Well, PSA has something in store for you. We will be giving away 500 and 300 pesos worth of GrabFood coupons to two lucky players. All you have to do is join in on the fun. Want to know how to win? Ready up your phones because, as the saying goes, the early bird always catches the raffle prize. So here are the mechanics for the UP PSA MedEureka Bingo Raffle. So first, contestants will fill up the bingo cards and post it in their respective Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram stories. Make sure to include hashtag PSA and hashtag MedEureka and any thoughts about events in your post. The number of ticked off categories does not matter as long as they remain posted in the stories for 24 hours. Then, send the proof of the posted bingo charts to the Google Forms link seen in the chat box. Deadline of sending screen caps is until 1:30 p.m. today. So again, two lucky winners will be randomly selected at the end of the set time period and will win Grab Food coupons worth 500 and 300 pesos each. Winners will be posted in the afternoon break and contacted by organizers to claim their prizes. So yes, encourage everyone to join this little bingo activity so that you can have a chance in winning Grab Food coupons. So it's that easy to win 500 and 300 pesos worth of Grab Foods. So try out our bingo to finally win a bingo game in your life. Let's go. Okay, so we will continue with our morning session at 10:41. So while waiting, we encourage everyone to join in on our little bingo activity. A participant is asking if we could show the bingo card again, please. So can we please show the bingo card again? Okay, there it is. So please take a picture using your phones or screen cap using your devices and post it on your social media accounts. And don't forget to use the hashtags hashtag PSA, hashtag MedEureka for a chance to win 500 pesos and 300 pesos worth of Grab Food coupons. So again, for those interested with our bingo game, just take a screen cap of this bingo sheet that you see on your screens and then share it on your Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram stories and include the hashtags hashtag PSA and hashtag MedEureka. And then you take a picture of, you send a proof of you actually posting it in your stories, and you need to upload it in the Google form link sent in the chat box. So from there, we will choose two lucky winners who will win 500 pesos and 300 pesos each worth of Grab food coupons. So yes, free food coupons. Okay, so I hope everyone enjoyed our mini game for all of you. Now on to more learning. This time on COVID-19 response. Let me introduce to you our speaker. Okay, so our speaker is the chairperson of the Hospital Infection Control Unit of the Philippine General Hospital. She also chairs the Antimicrobial Stewardship Committee and the Blood Infection Committee of UPPGH. She is an infectious disease specialist and is the head of the UP Prime TB Dots and the UP Leptospirosis Task Force. She also serves as the section head for the infectious disease section of the Medical City. She has given over 40 webinars on COVID-19 since the rise of COVID-19 in the Philippines last March 2020. For MedEureka, she will give us a short lecture on the COVID-19 surge and the strategies Philippine General Hospital undertook to cope with the difficult situations. Everyone, let's tune in to Dr. Regina Berba as she gives her talk entitled The Makings of a COVID-19 Surge.
Okay, hello everybody. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat.
Good
So,
morning.
can you give me lang few seconds to, yan, okay. So, I was listening to the talks earlier. Parang nakaka-nervous to follow their talks, no? But I'd like to move ahead and begin my lecture. So, thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm going to talk about the makings of a search. No? So this is my more or less overall outline. I'd like to just briefly talk about how we in the PGH transformed ourselves into the COVID referral center and then describe the emergence of the 2021 surge and how we tried to protect our healthcare workers and end with the lessons learned. So these are my, I declare no conflict of interest. These are my affiliations. And I'm sure you're very proud of our hospital, the Philippine General Hospital. We really celebrated 115 years of strong networking and teaching and learning in this, our beloved institution. So this is pre-COVID. We were once proud that during the pre-COVID era, we were like housing and taking care of over 1,500 patients at any given time. Pero parang gulo-gulo no, pag tignan mo yung photos. But when we were trying to initially plan out the COVID response of PGH to the coronavirus, no, we initially just planned out really a small response. Di namin alam na we were going to play an important role in this, in the turn of events. So parang in this map, parang if you recall the spine unit, so parang ganyan lang yung initial plan namin. We were going to only have like 3 rooms for suspect cases, maybe a common room for 6 beds for confirmed cases, and the extra space to see outpatient cases. Pero of course, iba yung tadhana. We were selected to be one of the referral hospitals. So we started transforming the university hospital to become one of the more important COVID referral centers in the Philippines. So it started off with this group of people, yung COVID cluster. Pero wala kami dyan. This is us. Eventually, we became an important part of the COVID crisis committee because parang ang dami namin palang kailangan gawin in this COVID response. So we actually became one of the core units, keeping on working to keep the hospital together. So again, pre-COVID, yan yung emergency room. Pero nung naging COVID na, parang naging ganito na tayo. Very, very fast. We had to do this very fast over really just a few days. So we had to design many of the things under one kind of principle. So we followed we tried to be as scientific in our approach kahit nasa stress na kami tsaka nagpapanic, and there was like a mix of fear and excitement and anxiety and stress. And we try to really just have an interplay of expertise and science together. So we had to design many of the workplaces that we had in PGH, which we converted to COVID wards using some innovations in engineering control. So all of this were put in place. So ganyan yung itsura if you haven't been inside the COVID floors. Parang the usual wards had to be safe, from ventilation to beds to everything had to be really safe. Tapos we started to expand to the OPD also. Tapos if you remember the triangle of outbreak response, so it starts with um, envir- uh, environmental controls, and then we move to administrative controls, which really meant policing or making sure that you have policies, traffic control. You were trying to make sure that people were following what was said and what you want to do. So every single centimeter, every square meter of the hospital, we needed to like categorize them, whether they belong to the red zone, orange zone, green zone, and make sure people were where they were supposed to go. Tapos, meron pa ngang mga complexities kasi meron na kaming COVID floors. Kala ko okay na. Tapos within the COVID floors, we would see TB patients being admitted simultaneously when they were diagnosed to have COVID. They were found to be always also have TB. So parang we needed to put TB isolation rooms within the COVID isolation room. So it continued to be very challenging up to the very end. No? So nagkaganyan. And as part of administrative control, we had to like keep on adapting policies to what was happening. So you would hear siguro sa Twitter, sa Facebook, maraming kaya ano ba yan, Hiko, palit na mga policies. But it was really trying to adapt to what was happening into the needs of the day. So eventually, yung testing, for example, yung testing, how did we come up with this very complex testing system? We started off just testing yung mga patients who came who were suspect to be COVID-19. But eventually we realized many of our patients belong to special patients. So even if they didn't have symptoms, they needed to be tested. And that included chemo patients, pregnant patients before delivery, and patients who need to undergo some special procedure in the OR. So we started testing them. Tapos, eventually, na-realize namin, dami palang patients na baka hindi namin nakikita. May COVID rin pala. Nag-came in for MI, for congestive heart failure, for acute appendicitis. So, we ended up testing all. It became a requirement prior to admission. And then the most difficult of all of these testing challenges were yung bantay pala had to be tested. Kasi sometimes you thought you had control of the situation. Tapos there was this bantay moving around the hospital undetected. So sila pala yung nagiging super spreaders. So we started testing the watchers. And then we had to watch the watchers kasi yun. So it's this very, very complex situation that eventually we needed to work out through the months. No? And then, of course, you've probably heard the HICU risk-based levels of PPE. Medyo naging sikat tong system na to yung level 1, 2, 3, 4, wherein we tried to make some kind of a systematic approach to what you should wear. So, pag nasa non-COVID wards ka, level 1, level 2, tapos nagka-level 3, level 4. Parang wala na tong debate. Pagka nandito ka sa COVID wards, ito yung susuot mo. And it became easier to manage. No? And then eventually we needed to produce the 2.5 nawala na yung level 1, tapos we needed to put in more as the days went on when we started opening non-COVID ICUs, wherein we needed greater protection than just the face mask. Tapos, of course, parang isipin nyo, wala namang pera itong PGH, pero nagmamalaki silang COVID referral centers. But we had a lot of things going on. So yan parang mga unsophisticated innovations actually are working very, very well. So it allowed us to actually control and regulate the amount of ventilation. And so far, we've managed to keep everybody safe. Okay. The other part of all of this is managing the healthcare workers. So very quickly also, we needed to train and keep on training and keep everybody up to date. So panay may mga ganyan. We've shifted from face-to-face training to virtual. Tapos naging magaling na sila sa putting on the PPEs. Noon, it took us like 20 minutes to put on your level 4 hazmats. Pero ngayon, in 3 minutes, tapos na sila. Tapos we had the safety officers is one of the best innovations we had, especially at the start of this COVID response. Somebody was watching you, Panay, when you're putting all of this together. It's like a coach or a buddy, no, to make sure people were safe. And then something that we never did before, yung fit testing, nababasa lang natin sa libro. Yan, we purchased that. And people really lined up to have all of this to make sure lang that we were wearing the PPEs accordingly. And then eventually we evolved to have PPEs for all. So hindi lang yung nasa COVID floors, we started to have PPEs for everybody. Even our security forces, pagka uuwi sila, we felt that was like a potentially dun yung risk for getting infections when you're moving out of the hospital, going back to your homes and back to the hospital. It was a period of time na we had to negotiate and make sure kung gagamitin nyo to, we will make sure you have enough PPEs where you need them and when you need them. And of course, we had to invest also, buti na lang, there's this group of IEC committee under Dr. Berberabe. Sobrang galing nila. They kept everybody on alert all the time, up to date. So we had IEC materials to keep everybody on the same page. Yeah. Of course, many of the things here emanated from HICU, pero without them, kasi hindi namin talaga to mako-communicate sa mga healthcare workers. So in effect, we really tried our hardest to maintain the staff on high level of morale and trust sa admin, sa system, that we were caring for them. So how did we know that we were protecting our staff? Well, kasi if you think about it, it's really the gist of what we were trying to do in PGH. Parang parallel na lang yung taking care of patients. But amidst all of this, we needed to make sure that we were doing this correctly. So by June, on the 3rd month of operations, we ventured into hospital-wide testing. Akala ko actually at that point, dami-dami na sa amin ng infected or asymptomatic pero infected. So we had this very intricately and expandedly planned out well. We tested everybody sa nasopharyngeal swab in a safe way. No? So it was an unprecedented high participation. So 4,871. Kaya hindi kami matapos-tapos. It took us like 3 weeks to finish everybody. Kasi people kept on registering for this. In the past, whenever we had like a HICO activity, usually our participation would be something like 30%, 40%, whether it was a survey or whatever, immunization campaign. But this kind of campaign, we had over like 98%. So parang galing-galing. And the best part of it was we only saw 2% among all those 4,871 people tested positive for the SARS-CoV-2. So sabi ko, uy, ang galing naman ang system natin. It works. All the innovations and all the time and all the efforts trying to keep the healthcare staff came into play. No? So parang sulit yung investment. Agad-agad may return of investment. And if you try to further parang disaggregate the data, you would see that there were other offices that actually had very, very low COVID infection rates at that time. So this was 3 months into the COVID operations. So we patted ourselves, sabi namin, oh, okay to parang ang galing natin. Pero you would see eventually, ang nangyari is maybe partly because everybody said, uy, ang galing natin, became a little bit complacent, and you would see na our bar graph over the next several weeks started to creep up. So ang taas-taas, ito yung nangyari sa epic curve ng PGH. No? So how do we read this? This graph, each day is represented by a line, and the line is either orange or blue or mixed. So yung we labeled the orange as community acquired. Ibig sabihin habang nung nakausap na namin si healthcare worker, we felt that it was probably from the community. Either there was a household contact, a community contact, or that person wasn't actually in PGH. Siguro hindi niya nakuha sa PGH. And the blue lines represented a categorization of healthcare workers infected because it was probably linked to COVID work. So nag-alaga siya ng some COVID patient or unknown link pero worked in a COVID area or linked to an infected PGH colleague. So yung June experience was just one of those na we had a mass testing. I don't really particularly endorse mass testing. But you would see here, di naman kami masyadong nagtitipid sa testing. So this graph naman represents how much testing we did. So as early as netong August, we kept on testing people. Pagka meron kang feeling na may sakit ka, go to UPHS and they will approve your test. So each bar here represents the day na nag-test. So sa y-axis, you would see there are weeks na more than 1,000 yung mga natetest. And the darker green part was the positive tests. No? So panay-panay less than 5% yung nakikita namin over this period of time. So as I said, I wasn't much into mass testing every 2 weeks. Parang that's so expensive, that's so labor intensive, and I think it won't benefit our system. So, but over the months, we tried to have more testing. So yung dito nakita nyo nung October, 3 months later from June, we had another test. Mas konti na yung tao. We just zoomed into the people working in the COVID wards. And then yan. So over time, you would see na yung infection rates namin 1.8, tapos medyo tumaas na sa 4.2. And you would see na over time, yung cumulative was around 11%. Pero we tried on keeping tab of what's happening everywhere. So dito sa tabulation na to, we always try to see, ano nga ba, ba't ba nai-infect yung mga staff natin? So we always wanted to work on making sure na they don't get it from the COVID wards, na dapat pagka mag-work ka, frontliner ka, dapat you have everything in your means not to get it during work. No? As much as possible, we try to protect them. So pagdating ng December, so mga bandang 8 months na to into the COVID, you would see na bandang right side of the graph, parang bumaba na yung number of healthcare workers infected. No? So dumating na yung time na there were days we didn't have any infections. And that was really a period of celebration. Nung bandang mga November, December, January, February, parang ang galing na namin. I think parang noon we said, oh, parang galing na natin. I think we've finally learned or mastered the approach to really not getting infected among the health staff. So on February, we decided to shift gear And instead of doing mass testing using nasopharyngeal swab, we decided to have a serosurveillance. So this means nag-measure kami ng SARS-CoV-2 IgG. So it was a measure of whether you had any kind of infection in the recent past or in the remote past. Okay? So pag nag-positive ka dun sa IgG, which is a chronic antibody, that means you had COVID-19 siguro, no? In the last several months. So here, ang pinakita nito, it's a rather complex table, pero yung very first row, yung non-reactive and was never sick, 74%. That means never had COVID-19 despite us being heavily burdened with COVID-19 among patients. No? So good job yun talaga. Okay. The other important part of this table is the pinaka-bottom. Nung merong antibody, pero yung healthcare worker never knew na nagkasakit siya. So, that's 8%. So, ibig sabihin, among staff, mga 8% ang nagka-infection, asymptomatic. So, may ganun pa rin. Even among us, in the health force, meron mga hindi alam na or hindi na feel na nagka-COVID-19 sila. And that means or implies that at some point they were actually infectious pero we weren't able to detect them. So are we okay in PGH? Sabi namin yes. So kung bibigyan ko ng grade yung PGH, I would say ito ay mga parang B+, no? 74%. We're still COVID-free as of February 21, 10 months into the COVID operations. And if we actually try to compare these numbers with what's published, so yung green, yun yung published, tapos yung PGH, yun yung aming mga data, you would see na parang comparable and in some parts, actually mas lower pa nga yung sa PGH. So we were very, very happy with this and quite reassured that what we were doing was okay. So, pero nag-iba yung kwento, nag-iba yung ihip ng hangin nung dumating yung March of this year. So we felt the emergence of the new surge. We actually started to see a change in our numbers as early as March 4, 2 weeks before the government declared a surge. No? So, wait lang. Wait lang. Okay. So, yan. Wait. So as I told you, the graph started to show much lower numbers. So parang 1 lang every other day yung nakikita ang infection. Pero pagdating ng March, ayan na nga, dumating bigla, ang dami na namang cases. So what was happening? We tried to understand it. But we already released a lot of HICO alerts. No? Sabi namin, something's happening, let's all be vigilant. And lo and behold, we didn't know that we started off with a lot of infections in Department A. So, ang dami na quarantine, no? So, yan. Kasi sunod-sunod sila nagkaka-infection. Tapos, from Department A, parang umabot sa Department B. So, we needed to quarantine more staff. So, parang na-paralyze na certain parts of the hospital. And there were departments that kept on like doing this face-to-face na sinabi namin, don't do it. We need to be extra careful. So we found out that most of this surge that we were feeling were coming from the community kasi tumataas na yung community numbers. And when persons coming in from the community, infected from the community, comes into PGH, tapos eats with us, works with us, yun, nai-infect ang more people. No? So we needed to stop all of this. So we said, wag na kayo pumasok pag may sakit kayo kasi mahahawan nyo lang yung iba. And that's important in the hospital setting kasi pagka maraming na-expose, maraming ka-quarantine, mapipilayan talaga certain important operations in the hospital. But then it persisted despite the alerts. Ayan pa rin, Department D became infected. There were still consultants who came in. Mapapagalitan na namin sila. Tapos things as important as the vaccination programs were also affected. So, and then it kept on like cascading to more departments and more offices. More people were getting infected. Until we realized, kasi pala napasukan kami ng South African variant. So we started to see na we realized from the Philippine Genome Center kasi we were submitting some samples to them that some of our healthcare workers were actually infected. So going back to our alerts and our epigraph, biglang meron pala kasi kaming South African variant here. And then eventually we realized, ang dami pala namin naging variants of concern. And that explained very clearly what was happening to our employees. Now, we were affected majorly by the migrants, by the variants. So, maybe from the migrants. So, yan yung variants. Na, ano ba yung variants? So, sila yung because of very rapid multiplication of the virus, there's a tendency na oops, nagkamali si virus. No? And sometimes it has impact on what the virus will do, particularly in transmissibility. So yan yung variants na nakuha namin. And yung mga reports na you heard over radio, na 114 variants in 150 samples, mostly galing yan sa PGH. So buti na lang hindi nila sinabi over TV and radio, but we knew it was from us. So what was the makings of the surge? So the variants were certainly part of it, but there were many other factors. I didn't want to say na, kasi ang daming tiwaling mga health employees, hindi nakikinig sa mga recommendations. But it was really more, I thought that our system, despite the 10 months that we were, 10 to 12 months that we were already under COVID operations, while our COVID wards were actually maybe okay, there were still other areas that still needed to be improved. So controlling the surge and taking care of those who take care of others, I think sa lahat na naging challenges ko on a personal level sa COVID, it was really this feeling na I had to really make sure that our system was securing our health force. So keeping our healthcare workers safe. It was very important kasi it was not just the individual lives of the healthcare workers, but of course yung families nila to which they were exposed, the families were exposed to the healthcare workers, and also our patients. No? Somebody had to like really take care of our patients, and we were really relying on our healthcare workers. So if we coming from our experience and also what's published in literature, we realize that healthcare workers don't get it from the wards. They get it elsewhere. They get it from here. Yung nakita nga natin, eating together, or when they're not wearing masks, or in situations na paalis na sila ng ospital and they're traveling from hospital to their homes, to their communities. So that's how healthcare workers in PGH and also across the world are getting infected. So, but it's important to realize this kasi when healthcare workers get infected, they'll probably also infect other colleagues, other patients, and other people. So, but yun, I think clear na dapat ang message na the healthcare workers, which we tell healthcare workers, kung mag-iingat kayo at susundin nyo yung ating PPEs, hindi kayo may-infect. So we think at this point in time, we have taught and oriented and trained our healthcare workers and provided them with the correct PPEs that they shouldn't be getting the infection anymore from our workplace. So naging very, very harsh yung response ng HICU and the rest of PGH. For the next 2 weeks when we had this surge, daming ibang rules, no? We needed to be very, very strict with everything. We put in precautions for people who were exposed in their households, in their communities. We kept on like testing everybody kasi I was really, really afraid of what this might turn out to be kasi baka mamaya ma-infect talaga yung buong ospital and we needed to have a stop to all of it. So after that period, we really again oriented everybody na kailangan mabilis tayo mag-respond. Hindi pwedeng 2 weeks later kasi mauubos tayo. So one of the more important principles in COVID-19, which I think is part of the reason why parang we can't put a stop to it on a national level, parang hindi kasi naintindihan ng mga tao na most infectious tayo just around the time we start feeling like we are ill. So when we start getting that sore throat, or the first day we do get the fever, or we start having the cough, dun tayo pinaka-infectious as you would see in this graph, no? Around the time we start having the symptoms. Hindi siya nung nalaman mo na yung result ng PCR, oh, that's already way ahead. So pagka kunyari, it takes you 3 days to decide magpapatest ka and then another 2 days to get the results, you would see na yung graph mo, nandun ka na marami ka na nahawa along the way. So we need to make that information very, very clear to as many people as possible. So, yeah, we also had to invest more time and more effort to making sure our hospital and all healthcare workers follow pandemic precautions. Parang ano na rin, parang as Dr. Albert was saying, parang pigang-piga na, naririnig na natin over and over again yung mga messages na to. But believe it or not, meron pa rin mga tao who can't seem to get it. So, and then I think if we did it in PGH, ganun din dapat ang approach sa on a country level, no? The system approach must be in place. We can't rely on individual persons. Kailangan when you make the system, andun na, hindi na mahirap for our healthcare workers to follow it. So if you have a good ventilation system, then that might work. We also put in a lot of safety officers again. So we looked for the strong, brave safety officers to make sure that people were being watched and people were complying. And all those potential periods wherein people can get infected, particularly yung eating. Talagang itong eating kasi that's when you remove your masks is a particularly risky part of the day's activities of the healthcare workers. So, nice namin yung pantries, yung cafeteria, we set up alternatives for all of this. And then we also looked at the call rooms of the residents. Paano naman hindi pala sila ma-infect kasi di pala maayos yung mga call rooms. So again, we tried not to blame our healthcare workers on an individual level, but instead tried to improve the system in general. So in the end, at the end of that very difficult month of March, we ended up having 286 healthcare workers infected. And that actually represented almost a third of the whole year's experience on COVID-19. Can you imagine yung sobrang ingat namin through the whole year? Parang naubos sila ng March and medyo parang nahuli lang ng 2 weeks yung pagdating ng bakuna. So we try to be as granular in our analysis para it will help guide us kung anong gagawin with staff. So very cautiously and sensitively, we try to identify sa bawat healthcare worker. Saan ba niyo nakuha yung COVID-19 niya? So we'd see here na yung orange is from community, yung gray is from household. So somebody in the family had COVID. Or yung yellow from coworker. Yeah, malapit na ako matapos. So, yung green is from PPE breach, so from workplace. Liit-liit lang ng mga bars na green. Ano? So, ano ibig sabihin ng community? Ito yung mga sinabi ng mga staff. No? So, nag-party, nag-outing, nagpamasahe, nagpa-makeup, lumabas, kumain sa mall. Dapat wag gawin. At sa PPE breach, yung andun ka na, nagko-code ka, tapos wala kang N95 mask, di ba? Parang sasakit yung ulo mo. And from coworkers again, when we eat together, or when a coworker who is sick comes to work. So we try to identify and try to work this out para sa ganon in time you would see yung dito kasi yung yellow is the number of people exposed. So yun yung trinatry namin sabihin. Kung papasok ka kasi may ma-expose ka. Pag na-expose mo maraming tao sa office nyo, maraming mapipilayan. You have to pull them out. In the end, most or almost all of the healthcare workers who got infected recovered. So we had no deaths. We had no critically ill patients. We had some who became moderate to severe, but they recovered. So, ito yung mga policies, parang pinapakita ko lang dito na talagang naging obsi kami sa policies. We just needed to have control of the situation, which I think we have control already. So ngayong April, we are in a better situation. So we redefined everything and try to tell staff what to do. Nilagay ko lang to, hindi nyo naman to talaga kailangan basahin para lang mapakita sa inyo na many of the things we tried to do were actually written down for information of everybody. But as was mentioned rin by our previous speakers, contact tracing is key. And I think this is the reason why, despite the huge number of variants and the large amount of surge that we had, over a few weeks natapos na yun eh. So ngayon we're back to normal na. Because contact tracing is key. Medyo complex. Kita nyo yung aming very complex algorithm. Pero as long as people follow them, we try to really reduce yung tinatawag na high-risk exposures, then we'll be able to manage whatever surges come in the future. Okay. Yung tungkol sa mass testing, hindi ako masyado for mass testing eh. Because as I said, kung yung 5,000 people, i-retest namin, parang hirap gawin yan, tsaka sobrang mahal. Instead, we really should shift efforts to something that's will end up as more beneficial to more people. So strengthen role of safety officers, optimize use of PPEs, go for training, make sure people comply, have more alcohol, have more routine environmental cleaning. So all of this will end up as better options rather than keeping pushing for mass testing. Tsaka pag nag-mass testing kasi parang people, pag nag-negative sila, may ganun talaga. I think it's a natural feeling or natural reaction. Yung pag negative ka biglang, uy, hindi kakain tayo sa labas. Parang ganun kasi nagse-celebrate kayo. So, but nevertheless, we didn't stop testing if it's important. So, if epidemiologically we think na expose, kailangan i-test, we do test. So, you see here na sa lahat ng pag-iingat, nagte-test pa rin ng marami. Lahat ng kailangan i-test based on exposures. We tested and eventually, basta nag-iingat lahat, all tests are really end up as negative. So, mga estudyante, kahit natakot-takot sila, meron siya sabi na for peace of mind. Yan, yung tawag namin sa mga test na ganun. And we allay fears and reduce anxiety. Yan. So, I think here what I wanted to show was yun nga, sometimes these are the parang outbreaks we've had over the months. And it's important that we told people na basta may sakit kayo, wag na kayo pumasok. I'd like to just show the last few slides. Hindi ko na sure kung narinig ko yung bell, pero I'd like to just share with you kasi parang maganda tong next series of slides. We collaborated with the Philippine Genome Center. So we noted some certain unique clusters clinically that we saw among healthcare workers. Tapos, trinay namin i-prove na talagang magkakamag-anak yung kanilang mga viruses. No? So here, may mga people na move from one, di ba sa PGH, may mga ganong employees their work involves working in various different departments at any given time. So kita namin nakita namin where they were going. Na-track namin sila kasi they left a trail of COVID-19 infections. No? So here, that was cluster 1. And we were able to prove that by genome sequencing. Cluster 2 is a carpool. No? So they traveled Manila Cavite yung carpool na to. But when one person in that carpool got infected, all of them got infected. And yung isa sa kanila is an essential worker. So pumasok siya kahit na meron siyang some illness, eventually infected everybody in the office. So our offices are set up that way, parang maliliit na offices. So ito yung isa sa mga in-improve namin, yung ventilation, kasi nga because of this experience. This cluster naman were interrelated kasi ito yung mga kumakain together. No? So from one office to the next, to the next, to the next, they infect each other kasi they move around without masks, eating. And the last cluster is face-to-face workshop. So early on, yung mga people, parang hindi pa rin sila naniniwala na don't do face-to-face. Sabi nila, kasi less than 30 minutes lang naman kami magmi-meet eh. Pero if there's one person there that's infected, mag-usap kayo close together, ma-infect nyo yung lahat. So these were proven clusters, no? So by genome sequencing. So kailangan maniwala tayo. Pag sinabi na hiko yun. So anyway, lessons learned. So we've actually been able to publish some of these lessons learned. Pero ang pinakamahalaga talaga is to recognize and appreciate that our staff are really our most valuable resources. So panay namin sinasabi thank you sa kanila. And without them, it's going to be impossible to keep on trying to care for other people with COVID. So all hands on deck, lahat ng kailangan nila, from derma to psych to religious to all kinds of support. Pati accommodations, trinay i-accommodate, pati transportation. So lahat yan kailangan nila. And we need to try to keep on finding solutions. This COVID-19 is so challenging. Talaga, it tested everything you've got. So may mga things na we tried, pero it did not work. So we even tried to recycle N95s, pero nobody wanted to follow this. We had even this very beautiful setup na may mga UV lights, tapos lalagay mo yung mask nun, pero nobody wanted to follow. So in the end, I said, this wouldn't work. But people need to just understand that we can get the infection. The community transmission is very high. We won't get it from the hospital, but we can get it elsewhere. Here, sa watchers, sa co-workers, sa family, sa community. Pero the only way, 30 seconds lang talaga. The only way is to move forward, but move forward together. So we need to do all of this that are part of it. What works for PGH will probably work for the rest of the country. That means science, solutions, systems approach, solidarity, and a strategic risk communication. Yung kaninang tanong, how can we prepare for the next pandemic? May sagot na ako sa inyo. We are preparing for the next pandemic, and being built between the OPD and the Ward 3 is this very beautiful isolation complex. We designed this to be state of the art. I think this will be finished in a few weeks. So we are indeed preparing for the next pandemic. For me, on a personal level, these are the lessons of COVID-19 for me, that life is really precious. We need to take care of each other. And to respond well to COVID-19, we need to be guided by what is known, which is science, what we know, which is expertise, and what we feel is needed by both our patients and our countrymen, which is compassion. And all of this strengthened by faith. So yun. Thank you very much for your attention. These are my acknowledgements. The beautiful ladies here are part of the HICU. Sila yung contact tracing team namin. That's Ma'am Merly, Ma'am Mary, and Ma'am Jeremy. And the photo at the top is the COVID command team. So yan, thank you very much for.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Birba, for that enlightening talk regarding the COVID-19 surge in the Philippines, especially your experiences in UPPGH. Knowing the mechanisms behind the makings of this notorious surge was very much interesting for all of us. Again, if you have questions for the open forum later, you can send them through Slido using this code 781601 or save them to be personally asked to our speakers. Just a reminder, in sending your questions, please don't forget to indicate who your question is addressed to. So I hope everyone still has energy for our fourth speaker this morning. Also, for COVID-19 response, here is a brief introduction for our next speaker. As a life sciences and health informatics professional and leader, our speaker's work is focused on the transformation of scientific research, health information assets, and data collection activities to create value. Recently, he organized a team of public health scientists, doctors, mathematicians, computer programmers, researchers, and students to respond to COVID-19 in the Philippines with epidemiological modeling, data science, contact tracing, PPE needs, and vaccines. Together with his colleagues, he co-established a COVID-19 toolkit which consists of guidelines, recommendations, data estimation tools and support, and informatics tools for contact tracing and monitoring to assist local governments, private organizations, and health decision makers across the Philippines in their response to COVID-19. Let us all listen to Dr. Romulo de Castro as he gives a talk entitled Our Informatics Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic.
Good morning, Renzo.
Good
Shall
morning,
I
sir.
open my shall I open my video? I guess there I am. Good
Yes,
morning,
sir.
Renzo and Nicole. Thank you so much for inviting me. I think I'm a repeat customer to this forum. Doc Badong Kawili, my foremost collaborator in UP Manila, has told me I'm on a 3-year cycle. I seem to be invited to give a talk at MedEureka every 3 years now. So I'm happy you invited me again. I know you invited me last year, but because of the pandemic, hindi yata natuloy ang lahat. So siguro payback na ito, no? So, but what I'll do is I'll share my slides now, and I will project from my slides. So, sometimes my computer crashes, no? So I've asked Nicole to just be ready to project my slides, or kunyari biglang nag-crash, ano na lang, maybe you can wait for me to come back, no? Because I have to reset my computer. But anyway, sandali, no? Let me go to my first slide. Sorry. Okay. So this is me, Romulo de Castro. I'm the director of the Center for Informatics at the University of San Agustin in Iloilo. I was brought to USA, or University of San Agustin, as a balik scientist to establish the Center for Informatics. So it was established in 2018, but we started operations in 2019. So syempre, almost only a few months after establishing the center, nag-pandemic na. So we had to pivot a lot of our research activities to this pandemic. Here you can see the website of the Center for Informatics, and here is the toolkit that you mentioned, at the introduction, no? So nandito yung toolkit, which is not just a product of the CFI, or the Center for Informatics. It's a collaboration among several institutions, including UP Manila, Department of DBMB, no? So Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, with led by Dr. Badong Kawili. We have collaborators from UP Diliman, the group of Dr. Vina Pearl Bongolan, and Professor Rosel Rivera. And we also have collaborators at the NCMH, National Center for Mental Health, led by their main epidemiologist, Dr. Emmanuel Sevilla, who also came from UP Manila before he went to. So you can see here that that the COVID-19 toolkit is broken down into several categories, namely recommendations and guidelines on testing, etc., COVID-19 data visualizations, epidemiology in terms of hospital resources, population modeling, community contact tracing, PPE needs, and an electronic medical record, clinical research data using REDCap, which actually has been applied to UP Manila. No? I think REDCap is used in UP Manila a lot, about the vaccines and also patient data. So let me move on. When we established, let me just tell you a little bit about the CFI, because this is brand new. And the first thing that I did when I got to San Agustin is to put together the abiding principles for the Center for Informatics. And these principles are the highest principles of data stewardship, which reside in ethical and responsible behavior for sourcing, sharing, and implementing data in a manner that will cause no harm and maximize positive impact. These principles are fairness, benefit to set people before data, openness, and reliability. So you have to be able to, you have to be reliable so that people, will trust the data. We advocate for data teamwork as well that are embodied in values of inclusion, experimentation, accountability, and impact. So prioritize only projects with well-defined goals and design them to achieve measurable and substantive outcomes. So these are the first things that I really make the workers of the CFI, really take to heart. Without these, I don't think there will be a CFI. And I'm happy to say that, hold on, let's see, that a lot of our, everybody in the team, including our collaborators, practice these principles. So this is the team. So that's me. We have a visiting scientist with us, Dr. Jared Dumangkas. And you may recognize Pia. So the staff is, is 3 people. Pia is one of the first MD PhD graduates. So galing sa inyo si Pia. You will probably recognize Dominic Bolinas as well, a current MD PhD. So he's been a great help to the CFI with a lot of the studies that I will describe later. So we also have Jonathan Rico, our research fellow, Nello Aguila from UPLB. Jonathan is a product of UP, Nello also UPLB, software developer. We have Julius, an undergrad but junior software developer. Joma is our machine learning guy. Of course, Dominic. Isa is from UPIS. She's a high school student. Benjamin is an MPH student at Angeles University Foundation. He's originally from Nigeria. And we even have alumni. We had Jie Kwon, who is an MPH student from Yale University. She got stuck in Iloilo during the beginning of the pandemic. And, she started helping us. And now she's been admitted to the PhD program at Yale. And so we're very, very proud of her. So that's the team. So let me go right ahead. So our data visualizations is what we have been doing for the last year. You can see here, we've been plotting the number of tests being undertaken and the number of positives. So you can see last January, our positivity rate was only 4.87. But 2 months later, I think maybe I can show that in the beginning slide. Hold on, let's see. Here, dito, no? Kita mo, 2 months later, 20 na. So it's like a 4-fold. And you can see the surge here, no? Which was described by Dr. Burba. You can even see the positivity rate has been increasing. We got to a point where, we had a positivity rate of 22%. So all of these are visualizations that we have been doing at the Center for Informatics now. So the additional visualizations, we monitor the number of positive cases per region, and you can see what we call the street light effect. A lot of the cases are in NCR because most of the testing is done in NCR. And in the regions where there are testing centers, mataas din, like Region 7, Davao, the original testing centers were in, I think, just Manila. And then afterwards, we added Visayas, and maybe in Davao. So maraming cases where the testing centers are. So this is part of, what we call the testing disparities that we discovered. We visualize the cases, karamihan sa mga na-infect, mga mild. Tapos may mga, mga recovered na pala. Tapos mild yung green, and then et cetera. Yung cases per age group naman, you can see here, this is an old slide actually, I haven't been updated. But pretty much the cases have shifted from originally the old people were getting infected and dying, but now it's the younger people who are getting infected. And this is just the cases per gender. So not much difference between males and females in most of the status categories, except maybe for the ones who died. There's still a lot more males that are dying compared to females. So we don't know what the reason is. There have been some literature on maybe anong tawag dito, hormonal protection, I think, against COVID in women. So baka parang may nabasa akong ganun na literature. So, but anyway, so we noticed that there's a difference in the deaths between male and female. All right. So, and here are the pandemic recommendations that we developed almost immediately. After the pandemic began, we developed the recommendations on the reuse of the PPEs. This is many of these recommendations were developed with Doc Badong Kawili, of UP Manila. On sample pooling, testing recommendations using antibodies and PCR tests combined in for low resource areas, also comparing the antibody test, preparation of viral transport medium, simply because at some point in time, the testing, they were like having problems with, viral transport medium. And, and we realized, actually Badong realized that the viral transport medium is like a simple Hanks balance salt solution lang pala. So, pero inarte-artehan pa. Problema pa pala yun. So we just simply put the recipe for Hanks balanced salt solution, and yun na yun, viral transport medium. And then we wrote a lockdown. We wrote an editorial on the relaxation of the lockdown, because I think around June, like beginning of June, after like 2 months in lockdown, the government was beginning to think about relaxing the lockdown, and we wrote this editorial to advise, as an editorial to, to give light to like why or when we should relax the lockdown. Ayan. So this is the sample pooling recommendations. Badong actually distributed this early on in UP Manila, and we got a lot of positive feedback, but also a lot of pushback. There was even a debate regarding this sample pooling technique, because at the beginning there was not a lot of testing being done, but we needed to test rapidly. So paano natin gagawin yon? So Badong and I came up with like this sample pooling protocol, which essentially is coming out of our research experience, because a lot of us in the lab have done this, because of the number of tests that we usually do exceeds our capacity, testing capacity. So nagpo-pool kami ng samples, no, and then we're able to find out which samples actually turn positive or negative just using sample pooling, and it saves on test kits. There was a lot of pushback, I think, from the medical community on sample pooling. And I think, that was not justified, but I understand it, because I think maybe medical people don't necessarily have experience in the lab, and therefore they're not exposed to the laboratory techniques that we actually regularly do in the lab. So hindi nila naintindihan, and therefore not too many people actually thought much about sample pooling. But at the very beginning, when we actually needed to ramp up our testing capacity, this was one of the potential solutions. Okay, so the bad news was that people just ignored, the medical communities pretty much ignored sample pooling, which was a solution back then. But there was a little bit of news afterwards when certain LGUs decided that they wanted to test their population, no, and they actually did use sample pooling. So kahit paano. And then we actually sent these recommendations to the IATF, mind you. So syempre hindi rin nila pinansin. Well, whatever. And now we have problems with our testing. We also made recommendations on PCR and antibody testing. No? So now I guess people all say that the PCR testing is the gold standard, blah, 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 blah. But, people somehow push back. Again, the medical community push back on antibody testing, which to us researchers, sometimes we don't understand. Because even if you say that maybe PCR is superior to antibody testing, it is very difficult to discount the utility of antibody testing in situations where there's a lack of testing. So you have to use all of what you have, to be able to ramp up on testing. And we even recommended these triage and evaluation protocols in order to help out maybe our doctors to the barrios where there's absolutely no testing. Pero again, I don't think our medical community failed to see the utility on antibody testing. We sent this to the IATF, and the good news is I think some of these were adopted. Some of these recommendations were actually adopted by the IATF. And as you can see, Dr. Burba indicated that there's antibody testing now. But back then, at the early phases of the pandemic, every other doctor I knew, who was not an immunologist, who was not an expert on diagnostics, was pushing back on antibody testing. So why was that? But anyway, just looking back now. So, all right. So anyway, parts of these were adopted by the IATF naman. So not entirely rejected. So sige. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this is very important work that we did, and this was led by the group of Dr. Pearl Bongolan. We started modeling the infection disease transmission using the standard SEIR model. No? So susceptible, exposed, infected, and removed. So very, very standard yan sa epidemiological modeling. No? And the reason we started doing this is because we were requested by Quezon City government to estimate the number of tests needed in Quezon City. No? And we even gave them, calculated the cost for the city. So and then we developed 3 manuscripts on SEIR modeling. All the work of the group of Dr. Bongolan with inputs from myself, Dr. Kawili, and Dr. Sevilleja. The first thing that was the model, the SEIR model, where the quarantine was incorporated. Kasi, well, we were going to quarantine, so we have to to include the effect of quarantine on the modeling. So the second one, and by the way, this one has been accepted for publication. No? So we developed this like as early as April, I think last year. No? And finally it got accepted for publication just recently, like a few weeks ago. And then after incorporating the Q term or the quarantine term, age stratification was incorporated because we noticed that the case fatality was distributing in an age stratified manner. So older people were dying, young people were fine. And so basically it was the age stratification was also a factor that needed to be incorporated. So lastly, in the age strat SEIR model, we incorporated nonlinear incidence rates. And nonlinear incidence rates are the incidence of the health protocols being followed, such as wearing masks or social distancing, or maybe the overall resistance of the population to to the infection. No? So all of these, we wrote manuscripts for these, and they've all been submitted, and there's preprints of these available online. You go to Doc Bongolan's. A lot of these models actually were used later on in our vaccine distribution modeling. So I'll talk about that in a minute. Oops, sorry about that. We also did hospital resources modeling for Iloilo. We used two independent modeling techniques. The first one was flu surge. Flu surge is used in estimating the hospital resources in a flu epidemic. This was actually suggested by Dean or former Dean of Nursing, Dr. Ludi Tejero. She's still with UP Manila. So we used the CDC flu surge tool to estimate the hospital resources in Iloilo province. And then we did another type of modeling called Hill SEIR modeling. In fact, Jie, our Korean MPH2 that led that effort on Hill SEIR. And basically what we modeled was how soon after releasing a location from lockdown will the hospital resources be overwhelmed. And what it gave us was actually, after you relax the lockdown, the peak, the infection peak is at 7 weeks after the relaxation of the lockdown or the release from lockdown. However, the hospital capacity would be overwhelmed as early as 4 weeks, after relaxing from the lockdown. Tapos, so the other independent modeling confirmed, the same thing. The figures were near. Not exact, but very near. So we thought that, okay, so we're probably, this modeling could probably be correct because they were confirming each other, even though they were done separately. And we sent all of these recommendations to the LGU in Iloilo, the governor, as well as the mayor of Iloilo City. And we don't know exactly what they did with it, but I don't think they went into a complete relaxation of the lockdown after June. And of course, we didn't see the overwhelming of the hospital resources, but that's what the modeling is for. You anticipate what's going to happen, you advise the health decision makers, and then they spring into action. And as a result, wala namang surge na nangyari sa Iloilo. Well, there was a little bit, but not as much as what we anticipated or what we modeled. So that was the utility of the hospital resources modeling. And then of course we this is what the editorial that we wrote about relaxing the lockdown. Kasi in I think in the around June, the government was trying to figure out, when to relax the lockdown. There were recommendations from several groups of modelers that were saying that, okay, this region you relax, itong region na ito you keep the quarantine, dito relax or release, whatever. Kami naman, when we looked at their projections, we realized that their recommendations were based on faulty testing data. So, I mean, how could you make those recommendations when you realize that the testing data, and base it on testing data to begin with, and then of course you realize that that's faulty testing data, or it wasn't even adequate testing data. So meaning, kulang-kulang yung testing data pero meron ng recommendations. So, in the end, what we said is, kailangan yung post-lockdown scenario natin are driven by data. No? So, in fact, we have to base that on testing data. So without the testing data, it's going to be difficult to promote all of these, recommendations that you are doing. We're not even testing correctly. And this is where we discovered, what Doc Badong says as, calls the street light effect. Maybe it's not Doc Badong's actual term, but this is actually the term for it. No, you only see the positives where you are actually testing. Meaning, so where you are not testing, you are not seeing anything. There could be cases there and there could be transmissions there. But since you are not testing, then, and then of course, from a national point of view, you say, okay, walang nagpa-positive dito, so i-relax na natin yung lockdown dyan. Pero in fact, because you're not testing, so mali yung basis ng decision. Okay, so that was early on. This was like June. All right, so our brilliant MD PhD student Dominic, after all of this, Dominic examined the COVID data from that was coming from the DOH. So he examined the two sources of official COVID data: the data drop on cases and tests, and also the data collect up on hospital testing. And what Dominic discovered was that both official government data sources were giving problematic tallies. So in fact, this was around the time that Mayor Treñas of Iloilo was quarreling with the national government for giving them incorrect data. So I think I have 10 minutes, tama ba? So again, the implications for policy would be, how could you base, policy on this problematic data? So ang suggestion ni Dominic, if you heard his brilliant talk, it's actually archived in our website, so you can look it up there. And Dominic, came to us with no experience in data. Well, maybe he has a little bit of experience in data science, but he took it by the horn and produced this brilliant presentation on the issues, on our issues on the national COVID data. The solution is data governance, which it seems the DOH is lacking. And the data governance, solves a lot of the problems of reliability, utilizability, data quality, etc., etc. So look up Dominic's talk in our website, and be prepared to be, to be pleasantly surprised with his findings. Oh, okay, so all right. So Pia, our postdoc fellow at CFI, now actually was commissioned to look into the disparities in healthcare delivery, and again, Pia found these testing disparities among the provinces in Iloilo during the early phase of the pandemic. So at that time, there was testing only in Iloilo, and one would expect, of course, that there would be disparities between where the testing center is and the neighboring provinces. What we in fact discovered is that there was no disparity between Iloilo and I think Capiz and Aklan. So walang disparity. However, merong disparity between Iloilo and Antique and Negros Occidental. So, and why was that? So Pia delved further into it and discovered that it may have to do with the processing and maybe some prioritization that was happening within the testing center. And she made some recommendations. So again, great work on disparities from one of you, the MD PhD products of UP Manila. Okay, vaccine work. So really early on, we put together a panel of vaccine experts, international experts. We called it the Vaccine Discussion Group. And a lot of our discussions are actually posted in our website as well. No? So we put together expert panels that we sent to the PCHRD to be able to consult. In fact, I was asked to be part of the vaccine industry technical advisory group, where I gave some of my advice to the PCHRD and the DOST, and also we sent some input letters to the FDA and the DOH and the IATF, particularly our vaccine input letter around early in January, just before we acquired the vaccines and started distributing them. We asked the DOH to the undersecretary to for these 4 points: vaccine evaluation transparency and information integrity. We asked for immunization prioritization based on the principles of justice and equity. We asked for distribution efficiency and rapid post administration monitoring and reporting. Meron bang nangyari? So it seems we keep sending some of these policy recommendations to the people in power, the health decision makers, but maybe they ignore us. And even with the strength of scientists, not just local scientists, but Filipino scientists abroad who are experts, the government still doesn't listen. So we've done our part. We did everything we can. So you can see that our response is actually very grassroots level. No, it's a bottom-up approach compared to what the government is ramming down our throats, which is a top-down approach coming out of non-experts. They're generals. They're not even doctors, or maybe they are, but there's very few scientists in that group. Dr. Bongolan started the vaccine distribution modeling and 5 minutes, no? I have 5 minutes. Let's see. So her findings are basically the vaccine distribution modeling just has to do with, because we have a limiting amount of vaccine from the very beginning of the distribution, we want to make sure that it is efficaciously distributed. But ano yung priorities natin? Is our priority, minimizing the infection or minimizing the deaths? And the answer is different depending on the priority. So it seems like if you want to minimize the infection transmission, you vaccinate the mobile workforce first. So this is after the healthcare workers, no? So healthcare workers and who's next? Pero if you want to minimize the deaths, you vaccinate the elderly. So Dr. Bongolan further did more work on vaccine distribution modeling in the Bangsamoro region using their own parameters over there, and found that you don't have to prioritize anybody in Bangsamoro. If you can give the vaccine to anybody there, and it will be the same. However, she also did a new simulation incorporating the poor in the vaccine, or the indigent in the vaccine prioritization. And you know what she found? She found that in fact, the greatest number of death prevention occurs if you prioritize giving the vaccine to poor people. So I leave her to do all the presentations later on. I'm just skimming, her findings in this. We developed a contact tracing app, which we rolled out in NCMH, and it was able to help curb their outbreak back in April. No, so this was specific for NCMH, National Center for Mental Health, because they specifically asked us to help them. And there was a discussion earlier about why are there so many contact tracing apps, blah blah blah, and why is it not just one national app? Okay, and I'll give you the answer. The answer is, if you do it nationally, your community will never get a hold of the data, your own data. So in other words, the reason we're doing it locally is because we're interested in the data, because that's the basis of decisions. If you send it to a national contact tracing app, it goes into a black hole of data and you never get it back. And therefore, you have no means to make decisions. No? So again, the decisions will come from a national level, and it has no granularity. So we could develop this app to empower communities so that they can see their own data, they can develop their own health policies. And in fact, it helped. So according to Doc Sevilleja, it allowed them to to curb their outbreak at the time they were having one in April. So we developed a PPE needs dashboard simply because the government had a command center, but they were not reaching the smaller facilities in far-flung areas, for PPEs. So we allowed those reached out to those smaller facilities and allowed them to broadcast their needs. And so they did. They broadcast their needs, and we found donors, including the Office of the Vice President, and we distributed PPEs to these smaller organizations. And itong PPE needs dashboard namin was a finalist in the Social Innovations Awards, I think, of the PCHRD. So finalists, we didn't win, but it's okay. It's good enough for us. All right. Okay, last few slides, sorry. Just a few more slides and then I'm done. We have an electronic medical record, what we, that we've been distributing for free to doctors. And, even before the pandemic, but we realized that, for the pandemic, it needs telehealth functionality. So this is what we're doing now. We're improving it with telehealth, and it's actually almost there. We're about to launch the telehealth functions of an EMR. So this one you may be, okay, 1 minute. Okay, this one you may be very familiar with because we have a RedCap instance, through the consortium of UPLB, UP Manila, and the Center for Informatics, University of San Agustin, and we've made it available to the COVID clinical trials, data management in UP Manila. So a lot of the the trials happening in UP Manila actually have their data in RedCap, which we administer. No, so RedCap stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. So, last na lang ito. And now we're also developing a COVID-19 patient data consortium among 5 hospitals, the major hospitals in Manila, including PGH. And this data consortium will aggregate data from all of these patient data from all of these hospitals so that they can be studied with regard to ito yung layers of security, and essentially 4 layers, super secure yung data. With regard to clinical course and disease severity, risk factors, comorbidities, etc., including herbal medicine use, because our population uses herbal medicine a lot. I think Dr. Lasarte will be talking about this mamaya, herbal medicine. So I'm hoping that we could capture all of that so that we can study, all of these things with regard to COVID patients. So anyway, I'll skip this, kaya lang, sayang. But if you ask me to talk about it later, I will. This is like, we were thinking of, we proposed to determine viral loads for individuals who are turning positive, and we also proposed an artificial intelligence or machine learning based detection of COVID-19 to do away with RT-PCR and even antigen testing. Pwedeng regular blood test na lang, tapos artificial intelligence, machine learning, tapos mura pa. So again, we proposed all of this, but the powers that be said we're not interested. So I cannot imagine why they would not be interested in any of these things. Whatever. But again, I mean, as grassroots people, I think maybe it's harder for us to get our work across, even though we are actually experts. So here it is. The community-based approach that we did, which is the bottom-up approach versus the government top-down approach, can inform the top-down approach. So where it is needed, how it is doing. So how is the top-down approach of the government? How is it, as in where is it needed in terms of, say, PPEs? How is it doing in terms of testing? It can check the government response for errors. So we know that there are so many data errors, and how can you base policy on data errors? No? It differs from the government response because it comes from the bottom up. No? And it fills in where the government falls short, and it has other applications beyond this epidemic. So let me just give you the organizations that we collaborate with, including a lot of the University of the Philippines campuses, a lot of the government, a number of government hospitals and private hospitals as well. And also, so we have some international collaborators in the US, in Canada, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and Turkey. That's it. Thank you. Sorry for exceeding my time.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. That was a very refreshing and informative talk, Dr. De Castro. We hope more people will be interested in the role of bioinformatics in epidemiology. So,
Informatics.
Yes, bioinformatics.
But we do have bioinformatics work. Hindi ko lang sinabi dito. Thank you.
Okay, sir, thank you. So, similar to earlier, we will have an open forum. However, we will only accommodate one question for each of our speakers due to time constraints. So we would begin with the question for Dr. Berba. So, ma'am, the question goes, recently, COVID-19 is being more established as an airborne disease. Are there being changes done in the hospital regarding this?
So that possibility has been there. It's part of the equation ever since. So kahit nung parang early part, nung February, so we've already considered that. Kaya there's the level 3 and level 4, yung N95 use, because we assume that for many of the processes, particularly sa sa loob ng COVID ward where you do yung tinatawag na aerosol generating procedures yan. More likely that the virus will behave and transmit by airborne route. So that's already part of the equation or the processes in the hospital setting. So I don't think it will make marked changes at this point. So in place na yan. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So the next question is for Dr. De Castro. So the question goes, how can we adapt or translate the bioinformatics work you have been doing to the pandemic response, especially in the LGUs?
Mm. So actually, in fact, so let me acknowledge first Doc Badong Kawili and Dr. Bongolan here, and also Dominic is here. So we've talked about it many times, paano namin ipapalabas ito sa LGU. In fact, a lot of our informatics resources that we make available are designed for LGU use. So the modeling can be applied to LGU, no, as long as we have the LGU parameters. The contact tracing certainly can be adapted to LGU level. Even yung mga recommendations namin, of course, were directed to Quezon City, to Iloilo City, and so nandun na all the elements are there, and we have actually been sending, to these LGUs, and we have our website where our COVID-19 COVID-19 toolkit is. So it's a matter of maybe the LGUs being serious with their pandemic response, for them to maybe look for scientific partners. I don't know who their scientific partners are. Siguro, I'm sure merong RESU, or I don't know, regional, or maybe barangay, or maybe municipal epidemiological, no? So kung nagkukulang sila dun sa response nila, I'm sure meron silang response. I mean, every city now or every municipality has response. To make it scientific, kailangan nila ng scientific partner, no? I mean, of course, you want medical doctors as well. Probably there's a municipal health doctor that's involved in their pandemic response. But to make it scientific, to base their local policies on, the actual data, and to make it data-driven, kailangan nila ng mga scientific partners. And maybe siguro kami, we need to reach out. But I think maybe they also need to seek the scientists, no? Parang if we reach out to like all the municipalities all over the Philippines, wala na, ubos na yung resources namin. And we're not very well funded, mind you. A lot of the work that we did were volunteer work. We just got together and started just doing all of this work. Dominic was a volunteer. He got stuck in Iloilo. He just decided to use his time to do all of the data work that he did, no? And even, a number of our interns are volunteers. Lahat kami puros volunteers. But we put together the toolkit anyway that can be used by LGUs. If you know any LGUs that need scientific tools or informatics tools, tell them. We're happy to provide them these tools that we develop.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. And thank you everyone for sending in your questions for the second open forum. For the unanswered questions, if it's okay with our speakers, we can forward these questions to them and then forward the responses to you. So wow, the morning sessions were truly informative and such an eye-opener as well. We hope that you guys were able to gain knowledge regarding the current status of our country's public health and response in context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So to give a brief synthesis, sharing their thoughts and insights about the discussion this morning, we have Mr. Ryan Christian Lintao. He is an MD PhD student from UP Manila and currently a medical intern in PGH. He is also a biomedical researcher in the DLSU Institute of Biomedical Engineering and Health Technologies. Everyone, let's welcome Mr. Ryan Lintao.
Hello. Hello. Good morning,
Hello.
everyone. Yes. So to synthesize this morning's talk, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us not just our individual vulnerabilities to get infected, but also the vulnerabilities of our institutions, particularly of our health system. After all, a pandemic involves human populations and thus is a public health concern. In the first talk, Dr. Albert Domingo provided us with an overview of our health system. Indeed, this pandemic has exposed the weaknesses in our country's health system, which have been present even before the pandemic. There are opportunities that we can take advantage of during this pandemic and in preparation for the next, such as UHC law and strengthening the primary care in our country. With the talk of Dr. Christopher Berse, we learned regarding the basics of crisis management and an honest assessment of our crisis response. Among the problems identified were poor organizational structure, lack of foresight, LGUs being relegated as mere implementers, and ineffective data collection and use, leading to problems in confidence and trust. Dr. Regina Berba discussed how the National Hospital, the Philippine General Hospital, responded to the pandemic. Guided by the data collected and new evidence, the hospital's infection and control unit continuously adapted its practices, which ensured relatively low infection rates in the hospital for a while. Even with the recent surge in healthcare worker infection, the hospital continued to gather data and update policies, even using new methods such as next generation sequencing of viral genomes to establish transmission of COVID-19 variants and the clustering of cases. Our best practices actually eventually became the framework of other hospitals and institutions hoping to replicate our success in PGH. Lastly, Dr. Jong De Castro discussed the informatic response to COVID-19. So, among the recommendations from the Center of Informatics were sample pooling in RT-PCR testing, which I agree it's very cost efficient. It was actually done in Germany to be able to amplify the testing there. Antibody RT-PCR decision tree, development of disease transmission epidemiology model, hospital resources modeling, vaccine distribution modeling, and other platforms and methods. Indeed, the field of informatics has come a long way since the last pandemic of influenza H1N1, and hopefully we translate it more to LGUs and other communities, so that we ensure that their response would be data driven. Taken together, the four talks reinforces the concept of health as being multifactorial. It's not just about the virology of COVID-19, it's not just about the SARS-CoV-2, the inherent characteristics of the virus, no? It's about the people, the institutions, the social determinants of health. Our situation is far from ideal. There is definitely room for improvement. What we need is a data-driven, science-based, interdisciplinary, people-centered systems approach to this pandemic. And with that, I end the synthesis for this morning's MedEureka. Back to you, Renzo.
Okay, so once again, we would like to thank Ryan for his synthesis of today's sessions. So now, to honor our speakers this morning, UPPSA would like to award them certificates of appreciation. If they are still here, may we please request our speakers to turn on their cameras?
Present.
Okay. Okay, hello, sir. So the certificate reads, this certificate is given to Dr. Albert Domingo for sharing his invaluable knowledge and expertise as a resource speaker during the MedEureka Coursing Through the Pandemic series given this 24th of April 2021 via Zoom. So the same certificate is given to, next slide, Dr. Christopher Berse, next slide, Dr. Gina Berba, next slide, Dr. Romulo De Castro, and finally, next slide, to our reactor, Mr. Ryan Christian Lin Tao. So again, we would want to send our sincere gratitude to our speakers and to our reactor for giving their valuable time and sharing their knowledge to all of our participants this morning. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Everyone, please join us in giving a virtual round of applause for our speakers. So now, before we end our morning session, may we request our participants to please turn on their cameras if they can for a while for a group photo. So, please request everyone, please open their cameras if they can, and then someone should take a group photo for us.
Morning, I'll be taking the photo. So please turn on ko if kaya lang naman. I'll be taking a screenshot in the count of three. Smile, everyone. Two panels now. One, two. Please hold your smile. Second panel. One, two. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. So if that's okay, so that's it for the morning session of MedEureka coursing through the pandemic. We will be having a lunch break and resume at 1 p.m. We would want to apologize for extending a bit over lunchtime for our morning session. So please do replenish your energy and relax your mind before the afternoon session because we would once again be filled with new knowledge from our upcoming speakers. Again, I'm Renzo, your moderator for this session. Thank you very much and see you later. Have a great day.
Thank you.